This is an analysis of why From works when almost every other mystery show in the last 20 years fell apart. Most shows in this genre start with a strong pilot, build a fan base around unanswered questions, and then collapse under the weight of promises they never intended to keep. From did something different, and the next 3 hours break down exactly what that difference is, how it shapes every scene in the show, and why it matters for the final season. So better get comfortable. Boyd Stevens arrived in Fromville the way everyone arrives, through a fallen tree on a road that used to go somewhere else. What separated him from the other survivors wasn't courage or intelligence or some supernatural gift the town handed him at the door. Boyd carried a military logistics background from tours in Afghanistan and Iraq, which meant his first instinct when everything fell apart wasn't to fight, it was to organize. Count the people. Count the food. Count the bullets. Build a system that keeps bodies alive until someone figures out why they need to be kept alive in the first place. That instinct turned him into the town's sheriff, a title nobody elected him to and nobody has tried to take from him, because the alternative to Boyd running things is nobody running things, and the residents of Fromville learned early that nobody running things gets people killed before sundown. Harold Perrineau described the character's foundation in a movie phone interview by pointing to Boyd's career. Once they told me that he had retired from the military, that already informed me a lot, because many people who join the military are people who are of service. Boyd didn't choose leadership because he wanted power. He chose it because the room needed someone to stand up, and standing up is the only thing his training prepared him to do when everything else stops making sense. And then there's Abby. Every character in From carries a wound they brought into the town, but Boyd's wound is the one that shapes everything the show does with him across 4 seasons. Abby Stevens, his wife, a Marine who earned the nickname Iron Abby for how tough she carried herself, broke under the pressure of Fromville faster and harder than anyone expected. Her theory was simple and terrifying. The town isn't real, this is a dream, and the way to wake up is to die. When she started shooting residents to test that theory, Boyd watched the strongest person he'd ever known dissolve into someone he didn't recognize. And when she turned the gun toward their son Ellis, Boyd pulled the trigger first. He killed his own wife to save his child. That act sits underneath every scene Boyd appears in for the rest of the series, coloring his leadership, his guilt, his relationship with Ellis, and the visions of Abby's ghost that the town uses to manipulate him in later seasons. CBR ran an analysis comparing Boyd to Rick Grimes from The Walking Dead, and the comparison holds on the surface. 2 leaders in impossible situations making brutal calls to protect their people. Where it breaks is the aftermath. Rick lost his wife Lori to circumstance. Boyd lost his wife to his own hand, and the difference between grief and guilt is the difference between a wound that heals and a wound that infects. Ghost Abby delivers one of the most devastating lines in the entire series when she tells Boyd that hope is what feeds their suffering, that his hope is what fed the forest and made him abandon her. Whether that's actually Abby speaking from beyond death or the town wearing her face to break him, doesn't change the impact. Boyd hears his dead wife tell him that the one thing keeping him alive, hope, is the thing that's feeding the system that killed her. And he keeps going anyway, because Boyd Stevens is a man who cannot stop even when stopping might be the only sane response to what he's carrying. Season 2 added another layer to Boyd's body the way the town adds layers to its victims' trauma. Martin, a fellow Marine chained in a dungeon beneath the tunnels, cut Boyd's arm and pressed their wounds together, transferring parasitic worms into Boyd's bloodstream with the words, "My blood is your blood." Those worms granted Boyd the ability to kill a creature, something no talisman, weapon, or strategy had accomplished in the town's entire history. When he slashed Smiley's throat and pressed his infected blood into the wound, the creature dropped dead on the ground, and for one brief moment the residents had proof that the things hunting them could be stopped. What nobody discussed in the celebration afterward was what that transfer cost Boyd personally. Martin's worms live inside him. They cause hallucinations, pain, and a connection to the town's systems that Boyd never asked for and can't remove. Collider's analysis of the Martin storyline noted that the blood transfer functions as a curse disguised as a gift, and that framing captures Boyd's entire arc. Every power the town grants him comes wrapped in something that makes his life worse. He can kill creatures now, but the killing requires his own body to serve as a delivery system for something parasitic, which means Boyd doesn't fight the town's monsters from the outside. He fights them by turning himself into a weapon, absorbing the poison so nobody else has to. Perrineau described the physical performance work behind Boyd's deterioration in an interview where he explained that Season 1 included subtle tremors he built into the character, a hint of hereditary Parkinson's disease that Boyd's father also carried. It's as subtle as going to scratch your eyebrow, and it reminds you, I got to figure this out quick, he told Moviefone. Those tremors functioned as a ticking clock underneath the survival drama, a reminder that Boyd's body was failing on its own timeline regardless of what the town did to him. By Season 3, Perrineau described a character on the brink of just fully spontaneously combusting right in the middle of the street, and the performance matches that description. Boyd's posture changes across seasons. His voice tightens. The pauses between his sentences grow longer, as if the effort of choosing the right words costs more energy each time he speaks. Season 4 brought Boyd to his lowest point, and the writing room earned it by spending 3 seasons building the distance between who he was when he arrived and who he's becoming. Kenny tells him there are 47 people left alive in the town, and Boyd's response isn't a plan for rescue or defense or escape. His response is to wonder whether they have enough bullets to give each person a clean death when the time comes, counting bullets instead of counting survivors, measuring ammunition instead of measuring hope. That shift from logistics of survival to logistics of mercy tells you everything about where 4 seasons of leadership have taken him. Perrineau captured the moment in a Collider interview by calling it the desperation of a person who no longer has faith, and that word, faith, matters because it connects back to Ghost Abby's warning about hope. Boyd lost hope somewhere between killing Smiley and watching the town rebuild Smiley inside Fatima's body. What replaced hope was duty, the muscle memory of a man who keeps showing up because he doesn't know how to stop, even when showing up means managing a death count instead of preventing one. The Season 4 tagline, "Become what you fear what you become," sits over Boyd's arc like a warning label the audience can read but the character can't. Fans built the theory that Boyd is being groomed to become the next Man in Yellow, and the evidence is uncomfortable. Dark-eyed awakenings in the trailer, the worms still in his blood. His shift from protector to punisher, from the man who saved people to the man who tortured Elgin for information in Season 3. Boyd keeps absorbing the town's poison into his own body, and at some point, the question stops being whether the poison will change him and starts being how much it already has. Perrineau describes Season 4 Boyd as mentally, physically, and emotionally torn apart while still being forced to move forward. And the contradiction in that description captures what makes Boyd different from every other leader in the mystery horror genre. Rick Grimes evolved. Jack Shepherd learned. Boyd is deteriorating, and the show tracks that deterioration with the precision of a medical chart, measuring his decline across seasons the way a doctor measures the progression of the disease his father carried. His body language closes across 4 years, his shoulders drop, his voice, which filled rooms in Season 1, narrows into something that barely reaches the person standing next to him by Season 4. What keeps Boyd standing isn't hope, because Abby's ghost told him hope feeds the forest, and he believed her. What keeps him standing is inertia, the forward momentum of a man who spent 30 years in the military learning that you don't stop moving when the mission turns bad. You stop moving when the mission is over, and Boyd's mission hasn't ended yet. Whether it ends with him saving the town or becoming the thing that runs it is the question the final season needs to answer, and Perrineau summarized the stakes perfectly. He's going to finish this, or it's going to finish him. His relationship with Kenny functions as the emotional anchor that keeps Boyd tethered to the version of himself that still cares. Ricky He described building Kenny's mannerisms and behaviors around Boyd, learning to be a man with Boyd, and calling Perrineau a real-life mentor and father figure on set. That surrogate dynamic operates as a mirror of everything Boyd lost with Ellis, a second chance at the father-son relationship he destroyed when he pulled the trigger on Abby. Kenny trusts Boyd the way Ellis can't, and that trust is both a gift and a weight, because every time Kenny follows Boyd into danger, Boyd carries the possibility of losing another son to add to the wound that never closed. Tabitha Matthews, the mother who keeps dying for her children. Tabitha arrived in Fromville as the emotional center of the Matthews family, a mother grieving the recent death of her youngest child Thomas, who fell from a changing table in a scene the show reveals gradually across multiple seasons. That grief defined her before the town ever touched her, and the town recognized it immediately, selecting Tabitha for visions of ghost children that nobody else could see, pulling on the one thread guaranteed to move her: a mother's inability to ignore suffering children, even when those children have been dead for centuries. Every decision Tabitha makes across 4 seasons traces back to that maternal drive. She digs in the colony house basement because the children showed her something buried there. She climbs the lighthouse because the children need someone to reach the top. She returns to the town after escaping because the children are still trapped inside it. Catalina Sandino Moreno, who earned an Academy Award nomination for Best Actress for Maria Full of Grace at 23 years old, the first Colombian actress to receive that nomination, brings a specificity to Tabitha's pain that elevates every scene beyond the plot mechanics surrounding it. When Tabitha stares at a wall, Sandino Moreno makes you feel the weight of what that wall is hiding rather than the curiosity of what's behind it. The Reincarnation reveal at the end of Season 3 rebuilt Tabitha's entire character from the foundation up. She is Miranda Kavanaugh reborn, Victor's mother returned in a new body carrying the same soul and the same mission: save the children trapped in the tunnels. Sandino Moreno told NBC Palm Springs that she only discovered this massive twist 3 days before receiving the script, which triggered an immediate sit-down with the producers where they walked her through everything Miranda experienced and how it connects to everything Tabitha has done without understanding why. That connection explains the bracelet she keeps making without knowing who taught her. It explains her love of Joni Mitchell's Blue, the same song Miranda shared with Henry Kavanaugh decades earlier. It explains why Tabitha can see the ghost children when nobody else can, because she's seen them before in a body she doesn't remember wearing. And it explains the lighthouse, where Miranda died and Tabitha fell, the same window across the same gap of 40 years. 2 versions of the same woman reaching for the same exit and paying the same price for getting close. Season 4 stripped away her remaining anchors. Jim died with a sign around his neck reading "Knowledge comes with a cost," removing the person Tabitha built her current life around and leaving her alone with 2 children in a town that already killed the previous version of her family. Sandino Moreno described Season 4 as heavier for Tabitha than anything before, and the performance reflects a woman operating on maternal instinct with nothing else left to fuel it. She hunts for the lighthouse because the lighthouse worked once, and because a mother running out of options will return to whatever door opened before, even if the last time it opened it threw her out a window. What makes Tabitha's arc work as character writing rather than plot mechanics is the trait the show established before any supernatural element entered her story. Tabitha rewrites stories. When Ethan worried about a character dying in one of his books, Tabitha's instinct wasn't to comfort him or prepare him for the reality that people die in stories. Her instinct was to revise reality rather than face it. That coping mechanism predates Fromville. She brought it with her, and the town recognized it as something it could use, because a woman who rewrites stories to protect her children is a woman who will do anything the town asks if the town frames the ask as saving children. Her role as a reincarnated savior exploits that trait with surgical precision. Save the children in the tunnels, climb the tower, find the bones. Every instruction the town feeds Tabitha through visions and ghost children is formatted as a quest to rescue young people in danger, and Tabitha follows every one of them because her psychological wiring won't let her ignore a child in pain. The town didn't select Tabitha randomly. It selected her because she is the person most vulnerable to the exact kind of manipulation the town specializes in, and the show has never fully addressed whether Tabitha's mission is genuine or whether the town is simply running the same con on her that it ran on Miranda, using the same soul's weakness to generate the same hope that feeds the same forest. Victor Kavanaugh, 40 Years of Silence. Victor has lived in Fromville longer than any other human being on the show, over 40 years spent hiding in buildings, sleeping in crawl spaces, avoiding creatures, and drawing pictures of things he saw, things he remembered, and things he couldn't tell the difference between. Scott McCord plays him with a stillness that communicates more than most actors communicate with full monologues, holding Victor in a space between child and adult that the show never resolves because Victor himself never resolved it. McCord described his approach to the character in a Screen Rant interview by framing adaptation as Victor's core trait. Victor really is. I've always seen him as he's his own creature of this environment, but he adapted. He explained, adding that the regression the writers built into the character kept going further and further, and just when you think it's done, no, we're going to keep going further and further. That regression is the engine of Victor's tragedy. Fromville didn't just trap him. It froze him, locking his emotional development at whatever age he stopped having anyone to develop alongside. His drawings function as the show's most elegant storytelling device, operating simultaneously as memory, prophecy, and therapy. It's good to draw the things you see, Victor tells Boyd, so even if you forget, the pictures remember. That line captures how Victor processes experience, outsourcing his memories to paper because his mind can't hold them safely on its own. Some drawings predicted events that hadn't happened yet, including a sketch of Boyd standing with a goat that foreshadowed a relationship seasons away from existing. Others recorded traumas Victor experienced and filed alongside his other images without distinguishing between past and premonition, which means Victor's art collection isn't an archive. It's an unsorted pile of everything a traumatized child's brain produced across 4 decades of solitude, and the show asks the audience to sort through it alongside the characters. The massacre sits at the center of everything Victor carries. Miranda hid him in the root cellar the night everyone died, told him to stay quiet, and never came back. Young Victor emerged into a town full of corpses, completely alone, with no adult to explain what happened or help him survive what came next. The boy in white found him and invited him to play on the merry-go-round outside the Matthews house, a gesture that sounds comforting until you picture a child sitting on playground equipment surrounded by the bodies of every person he ever knew, spinning in circles because a ghost boy told him it would be okay. McCord articulated the guilt Victor carries into his adult body during a CBR interview. Victor feels largely responsible for this lifetime lost. How can he not? When Henry Kavanaugh arrived in Season 3, forcing Victor to confront the father he'd spent 40 years believing he'd never see again, McCord described the emotional weight of the line, "I didn't know how to get home," as so laden with guilt that it contained an entire lifetime of apology compressed into 7 words. Victor didn't fail to escape because he lacked courage. He failed because he was a child, and the town doesn't grade on age. It trapped him the same way it traps everyone, and then it left him alone long enough for the guilt of surviving to become heavier than the trauma of what he survived. His relationship with Tabitha carries layers neither character fully understands. She is the reincarnation of his mother, wearing a different face and carrying the same soul. And McCord noted that a maternal feeling existed between them from their earliest scenes together, long before the reincarnation reveal gave the feeling a name. Victor talked about his mother to Tabitha in a Season 2 conversation inside the Peach Truck, maybe for the first time in a long time, and that intimacy didn't come from plot mechanics. It came from something neither character could explain, a soul recognizing another soul across a gap of 40 years and 2 different bodies. McCord described the evolution of his role in practical terms that mirror the character's own journey. Cast as a recurring guest in Season 1, he earned a promotion to series regular for Season 2 because Victor resonated with audiences and the writing room in ways nobody anticipated during pre-production. That promotion tracks with what McCord told TV Fanatic about Victor's trajectory in Season 3. Everything had been going inward, inward, inward for him for so long. And then the character began to act outwards, taking charge and growing up a little bit, in not-so-good ways. Victor's growth isn't redemptive. It's dangerous, because a man frozen in childhood suddenly accessing adult authority carries none of the social training that normally accompanies that transition. Victor makes decisions in Season 3 and 4 that a fully socialized adult wouldn't make, and the show treats those decisions as the logical consequence of raising yourself alone in a monster-infested forest for 4 decades. The town's relationship with Victor is different from its relationship with every other character, and the show has never fully explained why. Fromville killed everyone around Victor and left him alive. It let him hide for 40 years without sending the creatures after him with the focused intensity it deploys against other residents. Victor occupies a protected status inside the system that nobody granted him and nobody revoked, and the question of whether the town kept him alive for a purpose or simply forgot about him is one of the show's most unsettling open threads. A town that forgets about a man for 40 years is careless. A town that keeps a man alive for 40 years is planning something, and neither option makes Victor's continued survival feel safe. Jade, the smartest person in a room that doesn't care. Jade arrived in Fromville as the kind of person who treats intelligence as a personality trait, a tech millionaire who built and sold his own company, equipped with enough arrogance to believe he could solve the town's mystery through sheer cognitive force. That confidence lasted about 3 episodes before the symbol appeared in his peripheral vision and began the slow process of dismantling everything Jade thought he knew about his own mind. The symbol obsession mirrors Christopher's identical descent decades earlier, and the show stages the parallel deliberately enough that attentive viewers caught it before the reincarnation reveal confirmed what it meant. Christopher was the town's comedian, likable and social, until the symbol consumed his personality and turned him into a withdrawn figure nobody recognized. Jade followed the same trajectory step for step, moving from sharp and combative to isolated and fixated, spending scenes alone in the bar rebuilding the symbol from broken glass bottles while the people around him stopped trying to pull him back. David Alpay acknowledged the dark direction in a Screen Rant interview, noting that, if Christopher is any indication, Jade's path doesn't end well for the person walking it. What separates Jade from Christopher is the mushroom trip in Season 4, Episode 5. Jade took psilocybin, used Boyd as his anchor with the safe word Capricorn, and descended into the tunnels carrying nothing but a chemically altered consciousness and the hope that the town would show him something useful. What the town showed him was every past version of himself, each one murdered not by the creatures but by the residents, the same people he'd been trying to save. Every cycle, the reincarnated version of Christopher gets close to the truth, and every cycle the townspeople kill him for it because the children calling his name makes him a target rather than a savior. The violin scene in the Season 3 finale remains one of the most quietly devastating moments in the show. Jade picked up Victor's violin, played the bottle tree numbers as musical notes, and produced a lullaby his hands already knew. Muscle memory from a past life flowed through fingers that had never held the instrument in this one, and the children materialized around him in response to a song their parents sang before killing them. Jade didn't learn the tune. His body remembered it from a life his mind doesn't have access to. And that gap between physical knowledge and conscious awareness is the show's most elegant expression of what reincarnation feels like when you're living through it without a manual. The gemstone connection between Jade and Jasper is one of the show's longest-running planted clues, hiding in plain sight across 3 seasons before the reincarnation reveal gave it a reason to exist. Christopher's ventriloquist dummy carried a name from the same category as the man whose soul Christopher would eventually pass into, 2 gemstones separated by decades and connected by whatever system recycles consciousness inside Fromville. Jade and Jasper, the living man and the wooden puppet, both carrying names pulled from the same geological family, both connected to a soul the town keeps recycling through its cycle of obsession, discovery, and violent death. What separates Jade from every other character in the show is his function as the audience's surrogate. His frustration with the town's refusal to provide answers mirrors the frustration viewers carry across seasons of unanswered questions, and his obsessive hunt for the truth tracks alongside the fan community's own theory building in a way that feels deliberate rather than coincidental. When Jade screams at the town for withholding information, the audience screams with him, and when the town finally shows him something through the mushroom trip, the audience leans forward alongside a character whose hunger for answers matches their own. Jade represents every viewer who watches from and thinks, if I were there, I'd figure this out. And the show's response is to demonstrate exactly what happens to the person who thinks that. The same thing that happened to Christopher, and the Christopher before him, and every version of that soul, stretching back across however many cycles the town has been running. Kenny Lou, the grief that doesn't make noise. Kenny lost his father to Sarah's violence in Season 1, and his mother to the creature's cruelty in Season 3, leaving him as the only surviving member of his family in a town that took them one at a time and made him watch. Ricky, he plays the grief with an inward focus that distinguishes Kenny from every other character on the show, because where Boyd screams at mirrors and Jade drinks himself into obsession, Kenny folds his pain into duty and keeps showing up for shifts that nobody assigned him and nobody would blame him for abandoning. He described his approach to Telltale TV by explaining that Kenny is definitely shoving his grief down because he doesn't want to deal with it with other people around. He wants to deal with it privately. That privacy is what makes Kenny feel real in a show full of supernatural elements. His grief doesn't manifest as visions or powers or a connection to the town's mythology. It manifests as a man who goes to bed early because the silence of his room is the only place he allows himself to feel what he's carrying, and who puts on the deputy hat every morning because his mother made him promise to be a source of support rather than a source of rage. Tian Chen's death arrived in the Season 3 premiere with the kind of drawn-out brutality the show reserves for kills it wants the audience to feel in their bodies rather than their heads. Kenny listened from outside while the creatures took their time, and the grief that followed broke something that hadn't broken when his father died, because this time he heard it happening and couldn't intervene. Ricky, he told CBR he texted creator John Griffin immediately after reading the script. I sent John a text right away and I said, "Fuck you, man," and he said, "Hey, pretty good, right?" He recognized the death's narrative power even while mourning the character he'd built relationships with across 2 seasons, comparing the impact to the Red Wedding from Game of Thrones. The celebration jukebox scene crystallized everything the show uses Kenny to say about grief. Standing in the diner where his mother worked every day, surrounded by the counter she wiped and the kitchen she fed people from, Kenny wept while Kool and the Gang's party anthem blared from a jukebox nobody touched. He smashed it. Nobody in the audience blamed him, and the scene landed not because of the contrast between the song and the grief, which was obvious, but because of what the scene said about the town itself. Fromville selected that specific song for that specific man at that specific moment, measuring his pain with enough precision to choose the soundtrack that would hurt the most. Season 4 pushed Kenny toward a confrontation the show spent 3 seasons building. He volunteered for a near-suicidal mission to test a totem weapon against a creature, stepping into Boyd's position because Boyd's body and mind were no longer reliable enough to carry the risk. The weapon failed. Smiley cornered him on top of a bus and taunted him about his father's death, asking whether Kenny would make the same sounds his father made while dying. That moment, a grinning monster using a dead man's murder to torment the dead man's son, represents the cruelest thing the creatures have done to any character in 4 seasons, and it happened to the character who handles his pain the most quietly. Fatima saved him by seeing through Smiley's eyes and willing the creature to freeze, giving Kenny enough time to kick the monster off the bus and seal himself inside with a talisman. He survived because someone else's supernatural connection intervened at the exact right second, which means Kenny's survival in Season 4 didn't come from his own strength or the town's mercy. It came from a bond between a woman and the monster she birthed, a connection Kenny had no part in building, and the randomness of that rescue is what makes Kenny feel like the show's everyman. He lives and dies based on forces he doesn't control, the same way everyone does in the real world. And the only thing he contributes to his own survival is the willingness to keep standing up after each time the town knocks him down. Ricky He captured Kenny's entire philosophy in a single sentence during a TV Fanatic interview when he described hoping Kenny could join the pantheon of characters like Peter Parker and Jon Snow, people, the writers, refuse to let be happy, but who still find a way to keep on keeping on. That's Kenny Lou. No powers, no past lives, no worms in his blood, no connection to the town's mythology beyond being trapped inside it. Just a man who lost everything the town could take from him and still puts on the deputy hat every morning because his mother asked him to, and because the 46 other people counting on him deserve someone who shows up even when showing up costs more than staying in bed. Kenny's position in the show's ensemble carries a weight that his screen time doesn't always reflect, because he is the character who proves the show works on a purely human level even when the supernatural mechanics are stripped away. Boyd's story needs the worms. Tabitha's story needs the reincarnation cycle. Victor's story needs 40 years of isolation. Jade's story needs the symbol and the past lives. Kenny's story needs nothing but a man and his grief. And the fact that his scenes land as hard as anyone else's, with nothing supernatural driving them, tells you everything about what kind of show From actually is underneath the monsters and the mysteries and the mythology. Griffin said it plainly. If you don't care about the characters, you just don't care. Kenny is the test case for that philosophy, the character who carries no mystery box weight whatsoever and still makes you feel something every time the camera finds him, because his pain is the most ordinary pain on the show, and ordinary pain is the kind that never needs an explanation to hurt. How the town manipulates. The town of Fromville is not a setting, it is the antagonist. Across 4 seasons, the residents have hunted for a monster to blame: the creatures in the woods, the man in the yellow suit, some buried evil. But the deeper truth the show keeps circling is that the place itself is the predator, and everything inside it, the music, the phones, the trees, the food, the weather, the dead, is a tool in a single, patient hand. The creatures, as the prisoner Martin tells Boyd, are only the tip of the spear. This section treats the town as what it is: an intelligent, deliberate entity running an elaborate machine whose only purpose is to keep its victims alive, hoping, and suffering. We're going to take that machine apart piece by piece. 1. The jukeboxes as psychological weapons. Start with the diner. On every table sits a small tabletop jukebox, and from the very first episode, these machines play by themselves. No coins, no selection, no warning. Boyd Stevens, the town's self-appointed sheriff, has only one explanation, delivered with a shrug. They do that sometimes. It is the show's first and most chilling lesson in learned helplessness. The horror is not that the machines are haunted, the horror is that the people have stopped asking why. But the jukeboxes never play randomly, they play commentary. Every song the town selects is a knife aimed at whoever is in the room. The pattern is set in the pilot, Long Day's Journey into Night. As the sun sets and Boyd rings the bell warning everyone indoors, the jukebox switches on and plays the Animals' "We Gotta Get Out of This Place." It is the first song in the series, and it functions as a mission statement not of hope, but of mockery. These people will never get out of this place, and the town announces that fact in the opening hour with a pop song. In Choosing Day, after Tien Chen locks up the diner for the night, the jukeboxes play the Webb Sisters cover of Leonard Cohen's "If It Be Your Will." The lyrics are about surrendering totally to the will of another. If it be your will, that I speak no more. Played over the woman who runs the diner, it captures the deeper truth of the township. Rather than fighting, its people have surrendered themselves to whatever has trapped them. It is also quiet foreshadowing for a character the town will later torture to death. When the Matthews family has dinner with Boyd in A Rock and a Faraway, the jukebox plays Joni Mitchell's Blue, and Boyd delivers his signature line. They do that sometimes. Blue recurs as a song that connects couples across the show's timelines, a thread of melancholy the town seems to enjoy pulling. Then the town shows its sense of humor turns cruel. In Season 2's The Kindness of Strangers, as the sun rises and a busload of new arrivals sleeps in the diner, the jukeboxes wake everyone with Leonard Cohen's "Who" by Fire. As Screen Rant notes, the song takes its title from a Hebrew prayer, Unatane Tokef, recited on the Day of Atonement, which asks those who speak it to consider the upcoming year, to ponder who will live and who will die, who by fire, who by water. The town is, quite literally, playing a death-counting prayer over a room full of fresh victims it intends to kill. The cruelty peaks in Season 3. In When We Go, Kenny Liu sits alone in the diner grieving his mother Tian Chen, who has just been murdered by the creatures, and the jukebox plays Celebration by Kool and the Gang. A party anthem, over a son's grief. As Screen Rant observes, the upbeat song was chosen just to mess with Kenny. Angry and grieving, he tries to pull the jukebox from the wall, but he can't shut it off. The town wanted him to know it was watching, and that it was enjoying itself. In These Fragile Lives, the town targets a newcomer. Danny Acosta, a former cop, defiant, certain she'll find a way out, is in the diner when "Oh Child" by the Five Stair Steps begins to play. The song's lyrics promise that things are gonna get easier and things'll get brighter. In any other context, an anthem of hope. Here, aimed at a woman the town has no intention of ever releasing, it is taunting a hopeful song deployed as psychological torture, mocking her insistence that she'll succeed where Kenny and everyone before her failed. And the detail that ties the whole system together, Kenny turns to Acosta and explains, "They do that sometimes," the exact phrase Boyd used in Season 1. The line has become liturgy, passed down from one resident to the next, the town's manipulation absorbed into the culture of the trapped. Other tracks fill out the pattern. The Monkees' Last Train to Clarksville, Neil Young's Everybody Knows This Is Nowhere as a bus full of victims arrives, Bob Dylan's A Hard Rain's a Gonna Fall in Boyd's dream of an empty town, Roy Orbison's In Dreams as Boyd approaches Tian Chen, and Lyle Lovett's If I Had a Boat, which Boyd treats as a literal sign from his dead wife. The jukebox, in other words, is the town's narrator. It is the one voice that comments directly on the action, and it always speaks in someone else's words, a borrowed, deniable cruelty. 2. The phone and radio as threat channels. If the jukebox is the town's voice, the phones and radios are its hands reaching directly for individual throats. The defining moment comes in the Season 1 finale. Oh, the places we'll go. Jim Matthews, an amusement park engineer, builds a radio tower on the roof of Colony House, powering it with lamps whose cords lead to no real power source. He believes he is reaching out for rescue. He broadcasts a mayday. And a voice answers a voice that addresses him by name and says, "Your wife shouldn't be digging that hole, Jim." Tabitha, at that moment, is digging in their basement, searching for the source of the town's impossible electricity. The voice was not rescue. It was surveillance, and it was a threat. The genius of the manipulation is its disguise. Jim thinks he's gathering information. The town is delivering a warning dressed as information. And the show withholds the identity of that voice for 2 full seasons. Only in the Season 3 finale, Revelations, Chapter 2, does the man in the yellow suit appear to Jim in broad daylight, tell him knowledge comes with a cost, and this did not have to happen. Repeat the exact line, "Your wife shouldn't have dug that hole, Jim," and tear his throat out. The voice on the radio had been the town's apex predator all along. The phone calls, the static, the friendly answer to the mayday, all of it was the same entity, playing a years-long game. Notably, this entity walks in daylight, has claws and black eyes, and can speak over phones and radios, marking him as something distinct from, and above, the nighttime creatures. The town reuses the channel constantly. In Season 2, Kenny receives a phone call in his family's kitchen, a voice reciting the haunting nursery rhyme tied to the music box monster, after which a dream locust burns his arm. In Season 3, the calls come from Thomas, the Matthews' infant son who died before the series began. The voice takes on the form of a 10-year-old and works on the family's deepest wound. It tells Jim, "They're not your children anymore," meaning the town's forces have claimed Ethan and Julie. It tries to lure Ethan outside at night by claiming Tabitha is in danger and needs his help because the town needs the boy outdoors, vulnerable, after dark. As Screen Rant frames it, the call gives Jim misguided hope that his son may still be alive, exploiting the guilt he carries over the child's death. The phone is never a lifeline. It is bait disguised as a lifeline, exploiting grief as the hook. 3. The faraway trees as false hope. Scattered through the forest are trees with large hollows at the base of their trunks. Victor, the longest trapped resident, calls them faraway trees. Step inside one, and you are teleported elsewhere. Victor demonstrates the mechanic to Ethan in Season 1 by dropping a rock into the hollow. Moments later it falls from the sky beside them. It works for people too, he says, but you never know where you'll end up. That uncertainty is the whole trap. The trees offer the one thing the town has stolen from everyone, the possibility of going somewhere else, and the destinations reveal the town's intent with brutal clarity. When the creatures break into Colony House, Victor pushes Julie into a tree, and she arrives safely in the root cellar, proof the trees can save. When Boyd and Sarah are stranded in a rainstorm, Sarah sends an injured Boyd into a tree, and he lands at the bottom of a dry well, the dungeon, where he meets the chained prisoner Martin and is infected. When Tabitha needs to reach the lighthouse to save her comatose daughter, Victor leads her to the bottle tree, which always delivers to the same place. She steps in and arrives at the lighthouse, and ultimately escapes the town entirely. As Victor tells her before she steps in, they always take you different places and you never know where you'll end up. But my mother said this one was special. And then there is Dale. In Season 3's The Light of Day, over Tabitha and Jade's objections, the newcomer Dale insists on trying the bottle tree to reach the lighthouse. "You'll thank me later," he says, and disappears inside. The tree does not take him to the lighthouse. It materializes him inside the concrete wall of the Star Magic Motel pool back in town, crushing him to death instantly. The same device that saved Julie and freed Tabitha becomes an execution. That is the town's message. The escape route is real, and the town controls it, and it will use your hope to kill you when killing you serves a purpose. The destinations are not random. As the show makes clear, each placement serves a function. Boyd to the well to be psychologically broken and infected, Tabitha to the lighthouse to manufacture hope, Dale into the wall as a warning to the others. The trees are the town deciding, each time, what it wants from the traveler. The most devastating revelation about the trees comes in the Season 3 finale. The bottle trees hung with glass bottles containing slips of paper marked with 4-digit numbers are connected to the children the town sacrificed. As Tabitha remembers, via the boy in white, when the children were placed on the stones, they pour their hopes into the roots that made the symbol, and then those roots become the tree. The faraway trees grow from the dying hope of murdered children. Every teleportation, every flicker of escape the town offers is powered by dead kids. The hope the trees represent is literally manufactured from the destruction of the most hopeful beings imaginable. And the numbers in the bottles, which Jade spends a season trying to decode as dates or addresses, debating slips reading 1,864 and 2,659, turn out to be musical notes, the 12 tones of a scale, which Jade assembles into a lullaby. The town buried a children's lullaby inside its escape machine. When Jade finally plays it at the bottle tree, the ghost children appear, and the word they've been chanting, Angkui, resolves into its meaning. Remember. 4. The crops and infrastructure as sustenance control. The town keeps its prisoners alive, and it makes sure they never forget who's feeding them. The infrastructure is impossible by design. There is electricity, but no power lines and no wires. The cords in the houses, as Tabitha discovers when she digs, lead straight down into the ground. There is water without connected plumbing. The buildings came furnished, clothes folded in drawers, the belongings of past inhabitants still in place, as Sarah notes when newcomers pick through them. Jim and Jade power a radio tower using lamps that draw current from nothing. None of it should work. All of it works just well enough. That, just enough, is the point. The town provides the bare minimum to sustain life, never comfort, never surplus, never security. And in Season 3, it demonstrates exactly how much control it holds over the food supply. A storm wipes out half of Colony House's crops, and when Donna's team harvests what remains, every vegetable is rotten. Donna tells Boyd the soil itself is poisoned. The town's primary food source dies overnight. Panicked, the residents raid the diner's ration stores in Tien Chen's basement, turning on each other. The only remaining food is the livestock, and on cue, the creatures open the barn and pens and release the animals into the streets, forcing the starving residents outside at exactly the wrong time. It is in the resulting chaos that Boyd and Tien Chen are captured. This is the food system working as a leash. The crops, the animals, the rations the town can poison or scatter any of them at will, and it does so precisely when it wants to manufacture desperation or lure people into the open. Where the cows and chickens even come from in a town with poisoned soil is never explained, which is itself the answer. The town provides them, the way it provides everything, on its own terms and for its own ends. Sustenance is not a mercy here, it is a lever. 5. The creatures as controlled agents. The monsters that emerge at night are the most visible threat in Fromville, and the most misunderstood. For 3 seasons, the residents treat them as predators, governed by rules. They can't enter a space with a talisman, they hunt at night, they want to feed, but the show steadily dismantles that reading. The creatures are not animals, they are employees. The key line belongs to Martin, the emaciated man Boyd finds chained in the dungeon. Asked whether the creatures imprisoned him, Martin says they are only the tip of the spear agents of something larger and worse. The music box monster that tortured him for years is a deeper horror than the nighttime creatures, and the creatures know not to interfere with it. The show underlines this. When the unseen entity behind the cicadas and bloodworms put Boyd, Jim, Donna, and Randall in danger in the wrecked RV, the creatures stood several meters away and watched rather than attacking. They knew better than to interfere. The evidence that the creatures follow orders rather than instinct is everywhere. They know the residents' names and personal histories. The old lady creature tricks a child into believing she is the girl's grandmother to gain an invitation inside. They speak, they charm, they ask to be let in, they don't run or yell, they smile. Most tellingly, they choose to spare people when sparing serves the plan. In Season 3's premiere Shatter, the creatures surround Boyd and Tianchen in the barn, and instead of killing both, they tie Boyd to a post and force him to watch them torture Tianchen to death. They free him afterward. The kill was not for food. It was a performance staged for an audience of one, designed to break Boyd, after he declared in the Season 2 finale that the town would never break him. They do it again with Randall. Forced into a sadistic choice, Boyd sacrifices Randall to save the Matthews family and Henry, but the creatures don't kill Randall. They torture him, then deliver his mangled but living body to the doorstep of Colony House as a message. As CBR's analysis put it, the decision to leave Randall alive was a calculated, cruel, and targeted choice. Proof the creatures can do more than just kill. They can destroy lives, tear apart relationships, and undermine any sense of safety. If the rules the residents relied on were never real, CBR asks, what would be the next to fall? The rules the town taught its people were never fixed. They were a false sense of control, handed out so the town could revoke it. The theatricality is the giveaway. A real predator eats. These creatures stage tableau, a body left as a message, a torture performed for a forced witness, a victim spared to maximize the survivor's guilt. They are not following the logic of hunger. They are following a script, and the show's creators have confirmed this is intentional. As executive producer Jeff Pinkner told TV Fanatic, why the creatures look the way they looked is part of the controlling idea of this whole place. The monsters are an expression of the town's design, not a separate plague. 6. Dreams and visions as invasion. The one space that should be private, the inside of a sleeping mind, is the town's favorite point of entry. In Season 2, the music box monster traps Julie, Randall, and Marielle in coma-like states, their bodies catatonic in town, while their minds are tortured in the dungeon. Around the same time, the town begins to weaponize sleep directly. Elgin nearly drowns in his sleep, held underwater in a dream by a corpse-like ghost in a kimono, and wakes spitting up real water. The dream injury becomes a physical one. Season 3 makes the rule explicit. Dreams can now kill. Kenny is burned on the arm by a dream locust while the nursery rhyme plays, and the burn carries over into reality. As Christy and the others piece it together, Elgin dreaming of drowning and waking wet, Kenny dreaming of buzzing cicadas and waking burned, Marielle voices the new terror. Their dreams can harm them now. The residents realize, with horror, that the boundary between sleeping and waking has dissolved. There is nowhere the town cannot reach them. The invasions are tailored to each victim. Tabitha sees the ghost children who chant Angkui. Jade sees the symbol rendered as roots in the tunnel ceiling and the children on stone slabs, plus visions of Civil War soldiers. Sarah hears voices that order her to kill specific people, and she obeys, leaving the clinic door open so the creatures slaughter Bing Qian and Gina Lu. Father Khatri notes the voices specifically told her to kill Bing Qian, and even Ethan Matthews. Boyd, infected by Martin's blood, is haunted by a dancing ballerina. Elgin is courted by the kimono woman across his waking and sleeping life. In each case, the town uses the vision to extract a behavior. Kill this person, go outside, lose hope, distrust your neighbor. The mind, in Fromville, is not a refuge. It is the least defended door in the house. 7. The weather and environment as weapons. The town is not a fixed location. It moves, and it changes its own physics to apply pressure. The clearest proof comes from Victor, who has survived longer than anyone and tracks the forest obsessively. In Season 1's Choosing Day, Ethan finds Victor outside Colony House counting the steps to the tree line, checking to see if the trees moved. Later, in the diner, Victor tells Ethan flatly, 4 inches. The trees moved 4 inches. Ethan asks if that's good or bad. Victor, they're close, so it's bad. The forest is physically contracting around the town inch by inch, and the only person who notices has been so conditioned by decades of captivity that he simply measures it and adds that there's no point telling anyone, because they wouldn't understand. In Season 2's Forest for the Trees, Victor observes the trees losing their leaves and changing color. Ethan points out that happens every year, and Victor corrects him. This has never happened before. In all his decades trapped here, the seasons never turned. Now they do. Change in the township is usually bad, Victor says, and gives Ethan his old coat because, for the first time, it's getting cold. An environment that never had weather suddenly develops it, precisely as the town's manipulations escalate. And the weather reacts to defiance. When Jim's radio tower goes live in the Season 1 finale, the residents' most ambitious attempt to contact the outside world, a storm rolls in almost instantly across previously calm skies. Clara spots the clouds. Donna warns they have 10 minutes before the wind blows the tower off the roof. The moment Jim makes contact with the voice, the lamps powering the tower explode, sending glass shards everywhere and injuring Clara. The storm did not happen to coincide with the escape attempt, it answered it. The same storm later destroys the crops. The town's environment, like its music and its phones, is a channel through which it expresses displeasure and tightens the noose. 8. Ghost manipulation. The town keeps its dead on the payroll. Again and again it wears the faces of lost loved ones to steer the living toward despair or self-destruction. The clearest case is Boyd and his wife Abby, whom Boyd was forced to shoot in Season 1 after the town drove her to a murderous breakdown. In Season 2, as Boyd races to destroy the music box and free Julie, Randall, and Marielle, a vision of Abby appears and tries to talk him out of it. Destroying the box, she says, will only prolong everyone's suffering. The victims will die screaming regardless. He doesn't need to be a hero. He can stop suffering. He can join her. When Boyd asks why the monster would let her speak to him, Abby delivers the thesis statement of the entire series. Hope, not fear, is what feeds the forest, the very hope that made him abandon her when she needed him most. The town sent the face of his dead wife to convince him to give up because Boyd's hope is one of the most dangerous forces in Fromville. Boyd ignores her, smashes the box, and frees all 3 victims, embracing the hope she warned against. The pattern repeats. Boyd is haunted by visions of Father Khatri after the priest's death, the town using the dead man to push Boyd toward bad ends. The kimono woman, a drowned ghost, embeds herself in Elgin's life as a helpful presence, offering to save you and save all of you, and help you go back home if he helps her. Elgin comes to believe she is an angel. She manipulates his compassion and his bond with Fatima until he kidnaps the pregnant woman, locks her in the root cellar, and feeds her his own blood to accelerate the birth which produces not a baby but the reborn Smiley monster. As Soap Central observes, the kimono woman manipulated Elgin exactly, like how the voices in Sarah's head manipulated her to kill. She was just another scary apparition Elgin didn't understand. and the promise of salvation was a lie. Elgin thought he was the town's savior. He was its instrument. Whether these ghosts are the real dead or the town wearing their skin is left deliberately unresolved, and that ambiguity is itself part of the weapon. The grief is real either way, and the town knows precisely which dead face to send. 9. The fallen tree as the original trap. Before any of the other systems can operate, the town has to catch you. It does this with a single recurring image: a large tree fallen across the road, too heavy to move, surrounded by crows. Every resident encounters it. The Matthews family hits it on the way to the Grand Canyon. The Grand Rapids Runner bus hits it. The ambulance carrying Tabitha and Henry hits it. In each case, the fallen tree forces the travelers to reverse, and the moment they do, they are inside the town, trapped. The tree appears differently to different people, and on different roads, the wiki notes, the tree has a different appearance every scene it has been encountered. And critically, per the From Wiki, the tree is not visible once inside the township, and only appears to those the township wants to trap, so it appears to function as a gateway. It is a gateway disguised as an inconvenience, not a wall, but a polite detour you take willingly, never realizing you've been selected. The proof that this has been happening for a very long time sits rusting in the town's graveyard of vehicles, cars from many different decades, abandoned by people lured in across generations. The tree is not a recent phenomenon, it is the town's front door, and it has been swinging open for a very, very long time. Whether the selection is random or targeted is never fully answered, but the existence of reincarnation cycles Tabitha revealed in the Season 3 finale to be a reincarnation of Victor's mother, Miranda, and Jade of Christopher, returning lifetime after lifetime to try and fail to save the children, suggests the town chooses at least some of its victims with deliberate intent. 10. Hope as the primary fuel. Every system described above serves one master process, and Abby names it. Hope is what feeds the forest, not fear. This is the key that makes the whole machine intelligible. A town that simply wanted its residents dead would have killed them all on the first night. Instead, it keeps them alive, and it keeps them hoping, because hope is the resource it harvests. The talismans that ward off the creatures are not a flaw in the town's defenses, they are a feature of its design, doled out so that residents can survive the night and wake up to hope again tomorrow. Tellingly, the talismans only work in enclosed spaces and are voided the instant a door or window opens protection, always one human mistake away from failure, which is exactly how Sarah let the creatures into the clinic. Tabitha's escape through the lighthouse and her forced return when the ambulance hits the fallen tree is hope manufactured and then revoked. The faraway trees offer escape. The radio offers rescue. The food keeps coming. The dead promise salvation. Every one of these is a thread of hope, and every thread is a feeding tube. The balance the town maintains is exquisite and deliberate. Too much despair and the residents stop hoping they break, like Abby, or kill themselves, and the harvest ends. This is why the town works so hard on Boyd, the glue that holds the community together. It doesn't simply kill him, it tries to make him break on his own, because his despair is worth more than his corpse, too much hope and they might actually escape. So the town calibrates. A death here, a manufactured rescue there, a taunting song, a poisoned crop, a friendly ghost, a storm. It needs its residents alive and hoping, not dead and silent. The cruelty is not chaos. It is agriculture. The town is a farm, hope is the crop, and the people are the soil it grows in, kept watered with just enough mercy to keep producing, season after season, lifetime after lifetime. That is how the town manipulates. Not as a haunted house full of random scares, but as a single coherent intelligence running an integrated system: voice, hands, roots, weather, and dead, all tuned to one purpose: to keep the harvest alive. The creator John Griffin has said the town is a crucible for each of these people, a place built to strip away every external thing a person relies on until only the self remains. He meant it as a theme, but within the fiction, it doubles as a confession of method. The town takes everything, returns just enough to keep you reaching, and feeds on the reaching itself. Mythology and Symbolism. Dante's Descent. The opening line of Dante's Inferno describes the poet finding himself lost midway upon the journey of our life in a dark wood, having strayed from the true path. From opens with a family driving an ordinary highway that loops them into a town surrounded by a vast, menacing forest from which no road leads out. Both stories begin with the same image, a person in the middle of their life, standing in a forest that represents everything they've lost control of, unable to find the way back to where they started. Dante's hell descends in 9 concentric circles, each one containing a different category of sin, with a punishment that mirrors the transgression. Fromville descends in layers that follow the same vertical logic. The surface holds the living, the people who eat, argue, grieve, and try to survive inside furnished buildings that look almost normal from the outside. Beneath the surface sit the tunnels, a labyrinth of caves and passages filled with sleeping creatures, abandoned artifacts, and the remnants of previous cycles. And at the very bottom, past the tunnels, past the roots, sits the burial chamber where children's bodies rest on stone slabs in a circle, the foundational atrocity that created everything above it. Moving downward in From, the same way moving downward in Dante brings you closer to the source of the suffering, and the source is always worse than what you encountered on the way down. Dante had Virgil as his guide through hell, a Roman poet who died centuries before Dante's journey and who occupies limbo because he lived before Christianity could save him. Virgil knows the terrain, understands the rules, and leads Dante through dangers the poet couldn't navigate alone, but Virgil himself can never leave. Victor fills that role in From with uncomfortable precision, a man trapped since childhood, carrying decades of accumulated knowledge about the town's geography, rules, and hidden spaces, guiding newcomers like Tabitha through the tunnels and toward revelations he can describe but can't use to free himself. Victor is From's Virgil, a guide who understands the underworld better than anyone alive and who remains stuck inside it regardless of how many people he helps navigate its circles. One of Dante's most counterintuitive details is that the only exit from hell requires climbing down rather than up. Dante and Virgil reach Satan's frozen body at the center of the lowest circle, climb down his torso past the center of the earth, and emerge on the other side heading upward toward purgatory. The exit is through the monster, not away from it. From operates on the same inverted logic. Every attempt to escape outward, through the forest, down the roads, past the town's borders, fails. The characters who make progress toward escape move downward, into the tunnels, through the faraway trees, toward the bones and the buried truth. Tabitha reached the lighthouse by going through a tree that grows from dead children's hope, not by walking to the edge of town. The way out of Fromville points inward and downward, through the horror rather than around it, and that structural choice mirrors Dante's geometry so closely that the parallel feels architectural rather than coincidental. Dante organized each circle of hell around the principle of contrapasso, a concept where the punishment mirrors the sin in a way that creates poetic justice. Gluttons lie in filth. The wrathful fight each other eternally. The fraudulent wear masks of lead. From applies contrapasso to its central crime with devastating precision. Parents who sacrificed their children for immortality received immortality, just not the kind they expected. They became the creatures, granted eternal life inside desiccated bodies that can't eat, can't rest, and can't stop performing the violence that earned them the curse in the first place. The punishment is the wish, delivered exactly as requested and twisted into something no sane person would have agreed to if they'd understood the terms. Dante's Purgatorio, the second canticle of the Divine Comedy, describes a place where souls undergo purification through suffering before ascending to paradise. Multiple fan readings, and at least one critical analysis, treat Fromville less as hell and more as purgatory, a space designed to strip residents of everything external until only the soul remains, testing them through cycles of trial that either purify or destroy. The reincarnation cycle supports this reading. Tabitha and Jade return lifetime after lifetime, each time getting closer to completing the task that would free the children and end the cycle, each time failing and being sent back. Purgatory doesn't punish forever. It punishes until the debt is paid, and the question From's final season needs to answer is whether this cycle's version of Tabitha and Jade will finally pay it. The symbol, 3 branch-like lines intersecting inside a circle. That image drove Christopher insane decades before the current residents arrived, and it's been eating Jade alive across 3 seasons of the show without either man fully understanding what they were looking at. The symbol appears on walls, in visions, carved into surfaces, and burned into the consciousness of whoever the town selects to receive it. Most viewers spent 2 seasons assuming it represented something evil, a mark of the entity running Fromville, a brand the town stamps on the people it wants to destroy. Season 2's finale corrected that assumption in a way that changes how the entire show reads. Jade descended into the tunnels and found a chamber where stone slabs sat arranged in a circle, each one holding the ghostly image of a child pointing upward and chanting the word Ang-Kui. When Jade followed their gaze and looked at the ceiling, light from a natural opening above projected the pattern of tree roots growing overhead directly onto the floor below. Those roots formed the exact shape of the symbol, 3 intersecting lines inside a circle, grown into place over centuries by a process the Season 3 finale would eventually explain. The Boy in White delivered that explanation in Episode 8 of Season 3, titled Thresholds. Children were placed on those stone slabs by people who loved them and then killed them as part of a bargain with something the show hasn't fully named yet. Before each child died, someone told them a story meant to give them hope. That hope didn't disappear when their lives ended. It poured into the roots surrounding them, crystallizing into the pattern that would become the symbol, growing upward into the faraway trees that now teleport people across the town. The symbol isn't a mark of evil planted by whatever runs Fromville. It's a fossil, the preserved shape of dying children's hope pressed into wood and soil the way ancient organisms get pressed into stone. That origin reframes Christopher's obsession and Jade's identical descent into something more complicated than madness. Both men weren't corrupted by encountering something dark. They were overwhelmed by encountering something built from grief so concentrated that the human mind can't process it without breaking. Christopher stopped laughing. Jade stopped socializing. Both withdrew into fixation because the thing they found at the center of their obsession wasn't an answer they could use. It was a wound they couldn't close, belonging to children who died centuries ago and whose pain still radiates outward through the roots, the trees, and the town itself. The road that doesn't lead home. Dorothy Gale lands in Oz after a tornado rips her house from Kansas and drops it in a place she didn't choose, can't explain, and can't leave without help from a figure at the center of the system who turns out to be less powerful than he claimed. Every resident of Fromville arrives after a fallen tree, rips their vehicle from an ordinary road and drops them in a town they didn't choose, can't explain, and can't leave without understanding something about the intelligence at the center that nobody has fully decoded across 4 seasons. There's no place like home drives every minute of The Wizard of Oz, and that same sentence could serve as From's tagline without changing a word. Boyd wants to get his family home. Tabitha wants her children safe in the world they came from. Kenny wants the life his parents had before the town took them. Victor wants the childhood the massacre stole. Every character in From carries the same ache Dorothy carries, the specific and irreducible desire to return to a place that felt safe, and the town's entire design exists to keep that desire alive without ever satisfying it. Dorothy's companions each lack one thing they need: a brain, a heart, and courage. From's central characters carry equivalent absences that the town forces them to confront. Boyd lacks peace, carrying the guilt of killing Abby into every decision he makes as a leader who can't forgive himself for the one choice that defined him. Tabitha lacks memory, living inside a reincarnated soul whose past lives hold the answers she needs but can't access. Jade lacks humility, treating the town's mystery as a problem his intelligence should solve, and discovering that intelligence without emotional grounding leads to the same obsessive collapse it led Christopher into decades earlier. Victor lacks voice, holding more knowledge about Fromville than any living person, and struggling to communicate it through a mind that trauma froze at a child's developmental level. Dorothy wore ruby slippers the entire journey without understanding their power. From's residents carry talismans that protect them every night without understanding how they work where they came from, or what the symbols carved into their surface actually mean. Both objects function identically in their respective stories. Protective items that the characters possess from the beginning, whose true nature remains hidden until the story decides to reveal it, and whose mechanism operates on rules the characters can follow but can't explain. The garden that became a prison. Knowledge comes with a cost, appeared on a sign attached to Jim Matthews' corpse in Season 4, and those 5 words trace a line straight back to the opening chapters of Genesis. God placed 2 trees in the Garden of Eden. One gave life. The other gave knowledge of good and evil, and the instruction that came with it was simple: don't eat from this tree, because eating from it means death. The serpent convinced Eve that the fruit would make her wise, and the wisdom it delivered came packaged with exile, mortality, and suffering that extended to every generation that followed. From rebuilds that structure with the town as the garden, and the mystery at its center as the forbidden tree. Fromville looks pastoral from certain angles, green and quiet, with growing crops and running water and furnished houses that could pass for a small American town if you didn't notice the monsters. That surface reads as paradise, the same way Eden reads as paradise, a place designed to sustain life that functions as a cage for the people living inside it. Eating the fruit in Genesis meant gaining understanding at the cost of everything comfortable. Pursuing the mystery in From means the same thing, and Jim's death proved it. He dug for answers, reached for the radio, pursued knowledge the town didn't want him to have, and the entity running the system killed him with a note confirming that the pursuit itself was the offense. The parents who sacrificed their children invert the binding of Isaac from Genesis chapter 22. God commanded Abraham to sacrifice his son, tested his willingness, and then stopped the knife at the final moment. The child lived. The covenant held. In From, no angel stayed the hand. The parents completed the sacrifice, the children died, and the covenant that followed wasn't a blessing, it was a curse that created the monsters, the cycle, and the town itself. From is the version of the Abraham story where the knife falls, and the consequences of that completed sacrifice radiate outward across centuries in the form of smiling creatures, looping roads, and a forest that feeds on the hope of people trapped inside the punishment someone else earned. Father Khatri positioned this reading explicitly in Season 1 when he told Sarah that the residents might be living an unwritten 74th book of the Bible, a chapter that hasn't been completed because the people inside it haven't finished their role in the story. The Catholic Bible contains 73 books. Khatri counted them, noticed the town had no Bibles anywhere inside its borders, and built a theology around the gap. If the residents are living scripture in real time, their suffering has structure. Their deaths serve a narrative, and the mystery at the center of the town isn't a puzzle to solve. It's a testament to complete, one page at a time, written in the blood of everyone the town consumes. The Restless Dead and the World Tree. Irish mythology describes the slough as a host of restless spirits rejected by heaven, hell, and the Celtic otherworld, condemned to fly in groups and hunt the living after dark. They approach from the west, the traditional Celtic direction of death, and the only defense against them is closing every door and window before nightfall and refusing to acknowledge their presence outside. People in regions where the slough folklore persisted kept their west-facing windows permanently shuttered and taught their children that the sounds outside after dark belonged to something that would take them if they answered. From's creatures match that description with a precision that extends beyond general similarity into specific behavioral rules. They emerge at night, they cannot enter sealed spaces, they travel in groups. They possess knowledge of the living that dead things shouldn't have. They approach from the forest to the west of the town as the sun sets, and the only survival strategy Boyd established, sealing every door and window behind a talisman before darkness falls, mirrors the slough defense so closely that the folklore reads like a user manual for Fromville written 500 years before the show aired. The slough were also described in certain traditions as the spirits of unbaptized or murdered children who return to seek revenge on the living, a detail that lands differently when you know From's creatures were once parents who sacrificed their own children for immortality. The murdered children's spirits created the faraway trees and the symbol. The parents who murdered them became the smiling things that hunt after dark. Two halves of the same original crime, the children's hope growing upward into roots and the parents' guilt growing outward into monsters, occupying the same town and following rules that Celtic folklore mapped out centuries before anyone in Halifax built a television set on a vacant lot in Beaver Bank. The faraway trees connect to a different branch of Celtic tradition, the belief that specific trees function as doorways to the other world. Ancient Celts left a single sacred tree standing in every cleared field, believing it held power over the boundary between the living world and the realm beyond. Cutting a fairy tree invited catastrophe. Stepping inside one invited transportation to a place where time moved differently and return was never guaranteed. From's faraway trees operate on identical rules, transporting people to unknown destinations through hollow trunks that function as one-way doors the town controls. Norse mythology adds another layer through Yggdrasil, the world tree whose roots and branches connect all realms of existence. Three primary roots support Yggdrasil, extending into the worlds of the gods, the giants, and the dead. From Symbol, three intersecting lines within a circle, carries the same branching geometry, and the bottle tree that connects to the lighthouse functions as an axis between the town and the outside world in a way that parallels Yggdrasil's role as the structural spine, holding separate realities together. The talismans that protect residents each night carry markings that match the Norse tradition of protective bind runes, combinations of individual runes carved together into single warding symbols and placed at doorways to repel hostile forces. Whether the specific markings on From's talismans correspond to named runes from the Elder Futhark remains unconfirmed by the show's creators, but the function is identical. Carved stones placed at thresholds that prevent dangerous entities from crossing into protected space, activated by the act of sealing the boundary behind them. Norse families carved these into their doorframes 1,000 years ago. Boyd distributes them to every building in Fromville, and neither version has ever come with an explanation of why the symbols work. The Underworld Geography. Ethan's copy of Flight of the Chromonocle describes a location called the Lake of Tears, and Season 4 confirmed through Ghost Jim's instruction that the lake exists somewhere in or near Fromville and that Ethan needs to find it. That name translates almost directly into Greek. Cocytus, one of the 5 rivers of the Greek underworld, literally means river of lamentation, a waterway said to flow with the tears of the dead. Placing a lake of tears inside a town that functions as an underworld for trapped souls connects From's geography to Greek mythology through naming rather than just structural parallel. Karen stood at the banks of the river Acheron and decided who could cross into the land of the dead. Souls who hadn't been properly buried or who couldn't pay the toll wandered the near shore for eternity, trapped between life and death with no way forward and no way back. The man in yellow occupies that gatekeeper role inside, from the entity who controls passage into the town, who decides which travelers the fallen tree intercepts, and who appears to operate the boundary between Fromville and the outside world with the same authority Charon exercised over the banks of Acheron. The tunnels beneath the town form a labyrinth, and at the center of that labyrinth sits the burial chamber with the stone slabs where children died. Greek mythology placed a minotaur at the center of King Minos's labyrinth, a creature born from an unnatural act, fed on sacrificed youths sent as tribute from Athens. From places the remains of sacrificed children at the center of its own labyrinth, surrounded by the monstrous consequences of the act that put them there. Both labyrinths exist to contain a secret too terrible to keep above ground, and both require someone to descend into the maze and face what sits at the center before the pattern can break. Persephone ate pomegranate seeds in the underworld, and the act of consuming that food bound her to the realm of the dead permanently, unable to leave fully, regardless of what the gods negotiated afterward. From hasn't confirmed this parallel explicitly, but Fatima's pregnancy cravings for rotting vegetables and decomposing food carry the same logic. Eating what the town provides, consuming the sustenance Fromville generates from poisoned soil and impossible infrastructure, might function as the same kind of binding. Every meal the residents eat could tie them deeper into the system. The same way every pomegranate seed Persephone swallowed added another month she couldn't spend above ground. The cicadas that appear throughout Season 2 and 3 connect to Tithonus, the mortal lover of the goddess Eos, who received immortality without eternal youth. Tithonus aged endlessly, shrinking and withering until Eos transformed him into a cicada out of mercy, granting him an existence defined by endless life without vitality, form, or dignity. From's creatures carry the same curse. Parents who traded their children's lives for immortality received exactly what Tithonus received: eternal existence stripped of everything that made existence worth having. Their organs sit desiccated inside bodies that don't need food. Their faces smile because the expression froze centuries ago. They persist without living, the same way Tithonus persisted without living, and the cicadas that buzz through the show's soundscape mark every moment where that cursed immortality reasserts itself. The story that runs the town. Season 2's finale carries the title Once Upon a Time, and those 4 words do more structural work than any plot twist in the episode. From runs on storybook logic, a fact the show confirms through Ethan's repeated demonstrations that treating the town as a quest narrative produces better results than treating it as a survival scenario. Ethan quotes Flight of the Chromanocle to adults who are too focused on mechanics to hear what he's telling them. "We can't finish the quest unless we figure out the story," he explains, applying the logic of a children's book to a town full of monsters, and the show keeps proving him right. The Chromanocle describes a lake of tears that corresponds to a real location. Its narrative structure matches the quest framework the town appears to operate within. And the book exists only inside From's universe, which means someone inside the story wrote a guide to surviving it and published it as fiction in the outside world. The deepest fairy tale element isn't the book or the quest structure. It's the mechanism that created the town's foundational horror. Before each child died on the stone slabs, someone who loved them told them a story. That story gave the children hope, and the hope flowed into the roots and became the faraway trees, the symbol, and the supernatural infrastructure of Fromville itself. Story is the literal fuel of the town's existence. A narrative told to dying children powered the creation of everything the residents now navigate, which means From isn't a show that uses fairy tale structure as a framing device. It's a show where fairy tale structure is the physics, where stories have material consequences, and where the act of telling a tale to a child carries enough energy to build a prison that lasts centuries. The Boy in White's rule that a story can't be changed once it's been told governs everything Julie discovers about storywalking. She can witness events. She can participate in moments that were always part of the timeline. She cannot alter what already happened because the story has been told and the words can't be revised after they leave the narrator's mouth. That constraint operates on fairy tale logic rather than science fiction logic, following the rules of Once Upon a Time rather than the rules of time travel. And the distinction matters because it means the show's endgame probably won't involve going back and preventing the sacrifice. The story already happened. The children already died. What matters now is how the current characters finish the telling, and whether finishing the story properly, completing the quest the Chromanocle describes, is enough to break a cycle that has been running on the same unfinished narrative for centuries. The King Who Drives You Mad. Robert W. Chambers published The King in Yellow in 1895, a collection of interconnected stories built around a fictional play that drives anyone who reads it insane. The play itself never appears in full. Chambers describes its effect rather than its content, and the madness it produces spreads through exposure the way a virus spreads through contact. Encountering the yellow sign, the symbol associated with the king, triggers the same corruption in anyone who looks at it long enough. From borrowed that mechanic and applied it to the symbol, Christopher encountered the 3 intersecting lines and descended into obsession that destroyed his personality, his relationships, and eventually his life. Jade encountered the same image and followed the same trajectory, withdrawing from the people around him and pouring every ounce of his intelligence into decoding a shape that resists, decoding the way Chambers' play resists reading. The symbol in From functions exactly like the yellow sign in Chambers' stories, an image that corrupts the observer through the act of observation, punishing attention with madness and rewarding ignorance with the safety of not knowing. Chambers borrowed the city of Carcosa from Ambrose Bierce, describing it as a ruined place where time warps, reality destabilizes, and the boundaries between what's real and what's performed dissolve until the distinction stops mattering. Fromville matches that description across every season. Buildings from different eras stand next to each other without explanation. Time behaves differently inside the town's borders than outside them. The residents live inside a narrative that someone else authored, performing roles the town assigned them in a story they can't rewrite. And the line between the fictional chronological book and the real events of the show keeps blurring until the concept of fiction inside Fromville stops having a clear meaning. Naming the show's central antagonist the Man in Yellow, dressing him in a stained yellow suit, and giving him the power to corrupt minds through symbols and reshape reality through narrative control is the most direct literary signal the writers have planted in 4 seasons. Every other mythology connection in this section requires interpretation. This one requires nothing more than reading the name on the screen and tracing it back to the 1895 collection that invented the concept of a yellow-clad figure whose presence warps the world around him. The ghosts that can't rest, and the wheel that won't stop. Japanese folklore describes the yurei as spirits of the dead barred from peaceful afterlife, trapped between worlds until their unfinished business resolves. They appear in white burial kimono with long dark hair, associated with water and drowning, manifesting at the boundary between living and dead to complete whatever task their death interrupted. The kimono woman in From matches that description with visual precision, appearing to Elgin dripping wet in traditional clothing, communicating across the boundary between waking and sleeping, manipulating a living man into helping her complete an act she couldn't perform without hands made of flesh. The Onryo, a specific class of yurei driven by grudge or unfinished purpose, returns to the living world bringing disaster until the wrong that created them gets corrected. Every ghost in From operates under that framework. The children chant Ang Kui, which means remember, because remembering the sacrifice is the first step toward correcting it. The kimono woman manipulated Elgin into kidnapping Fatima because whatever birthed through Fatima's body served a purpose the ghost needed completed. These aren't random hauntings, they're task-driven manifestations, spirits executing unfinished business through whatever living person they can reach, following the Onryo pattern of purposeful return rather than the Western ghost pattern of aimless repetition. Hindu philosophy adds the final structural layer through samsara, the cycle of death and rebirth that binds souls to the material world until they achieve liberation. Tabitha and Jade have lived inside Fromville across multiple lifetimes, returning in new bodies with the same mission, failing each cycle, dying, and being reborn to try again. That repetition follows samsara's logic precisely. The soul carries karmic debt from one life into the next, and the debt Tabitha and Jade carry, the failure to save their own daughter during the original sacrifice, pulls them back into the town across centuries until the obligation resolves. Maya, the Hindu concept of the phenomenal world as illusion, describes exactly what Jade discovered when he found the hollow cables carrying electricity that doesn't exist. The town presents a surface reality that looks functional and obeys the rules of ordinary life: lamps that turn on, water that flows, crops that grow, until someone looks behind the surface and finds nothing there. Fromville is Maya made physical, an elaborate illusion sustained by something the residents can't perceive, and the act of lifting the veil, of seeing past the illusion to whatever truth the town hides underneath it, carries the same cost Genesis attaches to eating from the tree of knowledge. Understanding the illusion doesn't free you from it, it just lets you see the bars of the cage you were already standing in. The numbers that shouldn't exist. 97%. That's From's overall tomato meter score on Rotten Tomatoes across 4 seasons of television. Season 1 landed at 96%. Season 2 dropped slightly to 93%. And then something unusual happened, because seasons 3 and 4 both hit a perfect 100% from critics, a score that almost no horror show on any network has achieved even once, let alone twice in a row. Those numbers carry a specific kind of weight in an industry where mystery shows typically lose critics as they age. The pattern everyone expects looks like a strong opening season that builds goodwill, followed by a second season that tests patience, followed by a third season that breaks promises and watches the review scores collapse. From Reverse That Curve, every season performed better with critics than the one before it, which means the show's quality isn't holding steady. It's climbing, and climbing into a fifth and final season with that kind of momentum puts From in a category that most shows in this genre never reach. Jordan Williams at Screen Rant gave Season 4 a 9 out of 10 and called it the most intentional and coherent in its pacing, various subplots, and twists. Brian Tallarico at RogerEbert.com described a show where every time the writing gets frustrating on a critical level, the sheer momentum of the piece keeps you engaged. Neither of those quotes sound like critics grading on a curve for a small network. They sound like critics watching a show that earned its scores through craft rather than novelty, which is the first sign that something about From's construction operates differently from its peers. The show that changed everything and broke everything. Every conversation about mystery television starts with Lost, and every conversation about From's creative team leads back to the same place. Jack Bender directed 38 episodes of Lost, including the series finale. Jeff Pinkner wrote for it before moving to Fringe. Harold Perrineau played Michael Dawson on Lost for 6 seasons. 3 of the most important people behind From spent years inside the show that defined the genre and then watched it fracture its audience with an ending that left millions of viewers feeling cheated. Lost premiered in 2004 with one of the most expensive pilots in television history and built a cultural phenomenon around a simple promise. These mysteries have answers, and if you keep watching, you'll get them. The island, the smoke monster, the numbers, the polar bear, the hatch, every element created a question the audience assumed would pay off, and for a while the payoff came. Seasons 1 through 3 delivered answers that generated new questions in a cycle that felt sustainable and exciting. What changed was scale. Lost's writing room generated mysteries faster than it resolved them. And by the final season, the gap between questions asked and answers delivered had grown into something the show couldn't close in the episodes it had left. Bender himself acknowledged this openly when discussing From. His exact words were, 6 years of Lost was an amazing wave and a great learning experience, followed by the line that matters most. Every season is a chapter, but this is worked out. There's a path. The map is out there. And I'm not so sure it always was with Lost, as brilliant as Lost was. That admission sits at the center of why From exists in its current form. Bender didn't trash Lost. He credited it as a learning experience, and then identified the specific structural problem that caused the finale to disappoint, which was the absence of a fixed map. From was built with that map drawn before the first episode filmed, and the difference between the two shows starts there. 17 million viewers, and nowhere to go. Under the Dome premiered on CBS in June of 2013 and pulled in 17.8 million viewers in its first week, making it the highest-rated summer drama debut in 21 years. The premise grabbed people instantly. A small town sealed under an invisible dome, no way out, no explanation, survival mechanics kicking in while the mystery of the dome's origin built in the background. Stephen King's name sat on the source material, and CBS treated it as the kind of event television that could anchor an entire summer schedule. 3 seasons later, the show was canceled. Ratings fell every year as the writing room struggled to sustain a mystery that the first season had already stretched past its natural length. Characters behaved in ways that broke audience trust, making decisions that served plot mechanics rather than human logic. King himself delivered the verdict in a Washington Post interview, saying Under the Dome went entirely off the rails, and that one thing that killed him was, you never hear the sound of a generator anywhere. A complaint about basic believability that sounds small until you braiding this class Casavat. Realize it represents a fundamental disconnect between a show's mystery and the grounded reality that's supposed to support it. From absorbed that lesson directly, Griffin built a town where the infrastructure questions are part of the mystery rather than oversights the writers forgot to address. Electricity works without wires because the town wants it to, and Jade discovers the hollow cables in a scene that turns an under-the-dome-style plot hole into actual plot. Water flows without connected pipes. Crops grow in soil that shouldn't support agriculture. Every detail that would be a continuity error in a lesser show becomes evidence of the town's design in From, and that difference between the writers forgot and the writers meant that separates shows that collapse from shows that compound. The show that answered everything too fast. Wayward Pines arrived on Fox in 2015 as an M. Night Shyamalan-produced mystery about a Secret Service agent who wakes up in a town he can't leave. The first half of Season 1 built tension beautifully, stacking questions about the town's nature, its rules, and the creatures lurking outside its walls in a structure that felt like From's direct ancestor. Then the show revealed everything. Halfway through its first season, Wayward Pines explained the entire premise, emptied every chamber, and left nothing for the characters or the audience to chase. Season 2 arrived with no engine, no unanswered questions worth pursuing, and a cast of characters whose journey had already reached its destination in the previous year. Pajiba's review captured the problem by saying the show lost everything after the reveal, and IndieWire's headline for the second season carried the same exhaustion. From's writers clearly studied this failure because their information release strategy operates on the opposite principle. Every answer generates at least one new question, and the show never empties its chambers completely. Season 2 revealed the creatures can be killed with Martin's worms, which answered, "Can they die?" and immediately raised, "What are the worms? Where did Martin get them? And why does this transfer happen through blood?" Season 3 confirmed the children were sacrificed by their parents, which answered the origin question and immediately raised, "Who offered the deal? What was the deal's exact terms? And can it be reversed?" The show treats answers as currency spent to purchase new tension rather than as debts paid to close accounts, and that economic model keeps the mystery bank solvent in ways Wayward Pines emptied in a single withdrawal. The canceled, the exhausted, and the stalling. Netflix canceled the OA after 2 seasons in 2019, and the reaction from the fanbase measured the damage an unfinished mystery inflicts on the people who invested in it. Creator Britt Marling had planned 5 seasons. The show delivered 2 and stopped on a cliffhanger that will never resolve. Fans launched a Change.org petition, rented a Times Square billboard, and staged a hunger strike outside Netflix headquarters, none of which changed the outcome. What the OA's cancellation demonstrated was that a mystery show's greatest vulnerability isn't bad writing, it's losing the runway to finish. From's creators understood this, which is why the 5-season plan existed from the beginning and why the announcement of Season 5 as the final season came 4 days before the Season 4 premiere rather than as a last-minute scramble. Griffin told The Hollywood Reporter, "In full transparency, 5 seasons was always the goal. But we always wanted to let the story tell us when it was time to end. Knowing you have 5 seasons to fill, and planning your reveals across that span means you never run out of runway, and you never get canceled holding a cliffhanger you can't resolve." Manifest took the opposite approach and paid for it. NBC's mystery about a plane that disappeared and returned ran for 4 seasons across 2 networks, with Netflix picking it up after NBC canceled it, and the final stretch drew reviews that landed hard. Paste magazine described the last 10 episodes as dull and repetitive, and argued that everything feels like filler even when it technically isn't. The mystery of the death date, the central question driving the entire series, stretched across so many episodes that the tension leaked out of it the way air leaks from a balloon with a slow puncture. Nobody popped Manifest, it just deflated. Yellow Jackets on Showtime sits closest to From in quality and ambition, a dual timeline mystery about a high school soccer team stranded in the wilderness and the secrets they carry into adulthood. Season 1 earned massive critical praise and a passionate fanbase. Season 2 saw critics begin flagging the same pattern that killed Lost, warning that the show risked teasing the audience with juicy morsels of an overarching mystery but failing to deliver an orderly final menu. By Season 3, the lethargic pacing and dragged-out mystery complaints had become the dominant conversation around the show, and it was canceled after 3 seasons without its biggest questions answered. From and Yellow Jackets premiered within months of each other, targeted overlapping audiences, and operated in the same genre space. One of them is entering its planned final season with a 100% critic score. The other is gone, leaving behind the exact kind of unfinished business that erodes audience trust in the mystery genre as a whole. The show that proved it could be done. Dark premiered on Netflix in 2017 as a German-language mystery about time travel, missing children, and a small town hiding decades of interconnected secrets. Showrunners Janche Friese and Baran Bo Odar approached Netflix with a complete 3-season plan, knowing the final line of dialogue before the first episode aired. 3 seasons later, Dark ended with a finale that resolved its central mystery, paid off its character arcs, and earned a 95% score on Rotten Tomatoes without the kind of audience fracture that plagued Lost's ending. Dark is the single strongest piece of evidence that the know your ending philosophy works. A show that planned its conclusion from the beginning delivered on its promises in ways that shows operating without maps consistently failed to match. From's creator John Griffin uses almost identical language when describing his approach. We have always known exactly where the show is going, and exactly what the answers to the mystery are, he told interviewers, followed by the line that carries the most weight. The only way we could make this show is if we knew where it was heading. You can't dive into something like this blind. Dark and From occupy different genres, different languages, and different networks, but they share the one structural choice that separates mystery shows that land from mystery shows that crash. Both knew the ending before they wrote the beginning, and that knowledge shaped every episode between the 2 points in ways the audience can feel even when they can't articulate what's different. The road trip analogy. Griffin describes his approach to From's mystery structure using a comparison that sounds simple and contains the entire creative philosophy of the show. Any show is sort of like a contract with your audience. He explained in a TV Fanatic interview, "Come with us on this journey. We know where we're going, and we're going to make sure you enjoy the ride. Keep your eyes peeled because all your questions are going to be answered along the way." That framing positions the show as a road trip where the driver knows the destination but doesn't narrate every turn in advance. The passengers feel movement, they sense direction. They trust the driver because the car doesn't circle the same block twice. And the specific questions passengers ask, "Are we there yet? Why did we take this exit? What's that building we just passed?" get answered at the pace of the drive rather than the pace of the passenger's anxiety. What makes this work in practice is a principle Griffin articulated separately. None of us want to tell a story where we know all the answers ahead of time and we know exactly what every episode is going to look like because that is boring. But knowing the blueprint, exactly where we are going to begin, where we are going to end up, and all the milestones that will take place in between, that allows us to go off-road every once in a while. Controlled improvisation within a fixed structure. The ending is locked, the route adjusts, and the adjustments feel organic rather than panicked because the destination never moves. Pinkner reinforced this with a lesson he carried directly from Lost into From. "One of the lessons for me was pacing answers and having those answers lead to more questions," he explained. "Having a very purposeful deployment of those answers and making sure those answers lead to new questions, and making sure the show is well aware of the questions that the audience is asking and acknowledging them. That final phrase matters more than everything before it. The show acknowledges what the audience is asking. Characters voice the same frustrations viewers feel. Boyd asks why nobody can leave. Jade demands explanations the town won't provide. Jim writes his questions on a literal wall. The audience never screams at the screen alone because somebody on screen is already screaming the same thing." Pinkner tied this directly to a Lost mistake he remembered clearly. On Lost, certain mysteries, including the polar bear in the pilot, weren't mentioned to the rest of the castaways. Characters ignored questions the audience was fixated on, creating a disconnect between what viewers cared about and what the show addressed. From closes that gap by making the characters' questions and the audience's questions the same list, and then answering items from that list at a pace that feels deliberate rather than evasive. The King Endorsement and the Cult That Built Itself. Stephen King watched the pilot of From before it premiered and posted about it on January 11, 2022, 6 weeks before the first episode aired. "I just saw the first episode of From," he wrote. "I was absolutely riveted. True edge-of-your-seat stuff, believable and scary as hell." 18 months later he followed up with, "If you're a horror fan and not watching From, you should get with it." Scary shit. He even grouped From alongside Severance as the two shows he most wanted to binge, complaining that weekly episode releases made him impatient. King's endorsement functioned as the show's most effective marketing, arriving from the most trusted voice in horror fiction and carrying a credibility that no advertising budget could purchase. When the author who wrote it, The Shining, and Pet Sematary tells horror fans to watch something, the recommendation bypasses every normal discovery barrier and lands directly in the trust center of the target audience. From's early viewership growth maps onto King's posting timeline in a way that suggests his tweets did more for the show than MGM Plus's entire promotional campaign. And here's the thing about From's audience growth. Almost all of it happened through word of mouth. Screen Rant described the show as a word-of-mouth hit, gathering new devotees as it went along. Collider attributed its streaming surge to the show's cult following and strong word of mouth since its 2022 premiere. Nobody discovered From through a Super Bowl ad or a billboard campaign. People found it because someone they trusted told them to watch it, the same way King told his followers. The same way the fan community that calls itself the Fromily passes the show to friends with the urgency of someone sharing a secret they can't keep to themselves. That community earned its name through commitment rather than size. The Fromily, a combination of From and family, built theory boards, episode breakdowns, and character analyses across Reddit, YouTube, and TikTok that function as a second layer of the show's storytelling, a parallel analysis track that runs alongside the official narrative and sometimes catches details the writers planted for exactly this kind of obsessive attention. Griffin acknowledged the community directly, calling them a very robust online community in interviews. And the official MGM Plus press release announcing the 5th and final season included a joint statement from Pinkner, Griffin, and Bender that read, "We are grateful beyond measure for the mad passion of our entire Fromily." A show on MGM Plus, one of the smallest premium streaming services in America, became the most viewed series in the network's history, earned a 97% critics score across 4 seasons, secured a planned 5-season run with a confirmed ending, and built a self-sustaining fan community that generates more content about the show than the network's own marketing department. None of that happened because of budget or platform reach. It happened because the show works, and people who watch things that work tend to tell other people about them. Why any of this matters for the final season. From enters its 5th and final season carrying something almost no mystery show in television history has carried into its last chapter: audience trust. The critics trust the writing. The fans trust the ending exists. The community trusts the creator's word that answers are coming. And the track record across 4 seasons, rising scores, recovered audience satisfaction, delivered reveals, and an explicit 5-season plan executed on schedule, gives that trust a foundation that Lost, Under the Dome, Wayward Pines, The OA, Manifest, and Yellow Jackets never managed to build before their endings arrived or failed to arrive. Season 5 will either validate every structural choice the show made or it won't, and that binary outcome is the highest stakes version of the question Griffin's road trip analogy keeps circling back to. The passengers signed the contract. They got in the car. They trusted the driver through slow stretches and fast ones, through detours that felt purposeful and detours that tested patience, through 4 seasons of a mystery that has been more transparent about its methods than any show in the genre's history. Now the car is approaching the destination. Every show mentioned in this section faced a version of this moment, the final stretch where promises either convert into payoffs or reveal themselves as empty. Lost arrived at this point and split its audience. Dark arrived and delivered. From sits between those two outcomes right now, closer to Dark's trajectory than Lost's based on every available metric, but carrying the weight of a genre that has taught its audience to expect disappointment even when the evidence points toward satisfaction. That tension between earned trust and inherited skepticism is what makes From's final season the most interesting event in mystery television since Lost's last episode aired in 2010. The show earned its shot. Whether it lands, the ending will determine whether From becomes the show that finally proved a mystery box could close properly, or whether it joins the list of series that came closer than anyone else and still fell short. Either way, the ride was worth it, and the next sections of this analysis break down exactly why. The three people who built the blueprint. The writing structure of From did not come together by accident, and it did not come from a single person sitting alone at a keyboard. The show carries the fingerprints of three creative minds working in tight coordination, each pulling from a different background, each bringing a piece of the puzzle that holds the whole thing together. John Griffin created the series, and before this project, he had built a smaller resume that included a Twilight Zone episode and the Disney Plus film Crater, which makes, from his first real swing at a long-form serialized mystery. Pairing him with Jeff Pinkner as showrunner gave the production its spine, because Pinkner came directly from the writers' rooms of Lost, Alias, and Fringe, and he carried those storytelling muscles into every decision about how mysteries should be deployed and how characters should react to them. Rounding out the trio is Jack Bender, the director whose name carries enormous weight in genre television, having helmed 38 episodes of Lost between 2004 and 2010, including the series finale titled The End, along with high-profile work on The Sopranos and Game of Thrones. Bender's role on From operates almost like a visual signature stamp, since the original Season 1 order specifically named him as the director of the first 4 episodes, and that arrangement became the convention that he handles every premiere going forward. His involvement gives each season a consistent visual launching pad, even when other directors rotate in for the middle episodes, which means viewers walking into a new year of From are greeted by the same eye behind the camera that introduced them to the town in the first place. Pinkner has been blunt about how the foundational method works, telling the press at the 2022 TCA panel that having done Lost and run those lessons through the filter of Fringe, the creative team approached this series so that every season operates as its own chapter with its own questions and its own answers. That single sentence reveals more about the architecture of From than any episode summary could, because it tells you the show is not one giant mystery box being slowly cranked open across an undefined number of years, but a sequence of contained arcs that each carry their own narrative weight. How every episode begins. From almost always opens cold, which means the show drops viewers into a scene before the Pixies' title card ever appears, and the cold open is doing real structural work rather than serving as decoration. The convention has held across all 4 seasons, and the premiere episodes use the cold open in the most ambitious ways. Season 4, Episode 1, titled The Arrival, opens with the man in yellow killing Jim, picking up at the exact frame where Season 3 left off, which means the audience gets no buffer between the previous season's cliffhanger and the next season's first emotional gut punch. That same premiere then saves its biggest twist, the reveal that Sophia is the man in yellow, for the very end of the episode, which is a textbook execution of horror cold open craft, where the antagonistic threat gets reintroduced in the first frames, and a fresh threat gets seeded for the season ahead. The Pixies' cover of Que Sera, Sarah that plays under the title sequence, is doing more than serving as a mood piece. The song originally lived in the 1956 Jay Livingston and Ray Evans catalog, and it first reached audiences through Hitchcock's The Man Who Knew Too Much, which already carried suspense connotations decades before this show borrowed it. The Pixies recorded the cover specifically for From, and composer Chris Tilton handles the broader score, which gives the entire audio palette of the show a unified feeling, even when no music is playing at all. The Financial Times described the cover by noting that the series rips up the tune and cuts out the middle verse, evoking late-period Leonard Cohen with a lead vocal that gets half-spoken against an angelic chorus. Thematically, the cover inverts the original's optimism into fatalism, and that inversion lands directly on the audience because the lullaby promise of whatever will be has been twisted into a warning to focus on surviving the night. The fact that the title card lands only after the cold open instead of leading the episode tells you something about the show's confidence in its own machinery. Most network shows still front-load their branding to lock viewers in before any narrative momentum begins, but premium cable and streaming series have the freedom to delay the title, and From uses that freedom every single week. The hook comes first, the brand comes second, and the audience has already been gripped by something violent or strange or quietly disturbing before the song even begins. Act structure and runtime. IMDb's technical specifications list each episode at a 52-minute runtime, shot at a 2.00 to 1 aspect ratio in UHD video, which gives from a cinematic frame that feels closer to a feature film than a typical hour of television. The streaming and premium cable home of the show, originally Epix and now MGM+, frees it from the obligations of network act breaks and the standard 42 or 43-minute network slot. Pinkner once described the Fringe network target as 43 minutes and 25 seconds, which is a remarkably specific number that reveals how rigid the network model used to be. From operates with roughly 10 extra minutes per hour and complete freedom from commercial break beats, which lets scenes breathe in ways that would be impossible on broadcast television. 10 episodes per season is the standard order, and Griffin and Pinkner have spoken about treating that compression as a discipline rather than a constraint. Their philosophy on the order length is that limitations force harder choices, which means every subplot that survives has to justify its place in the season, and every scene has to do more than one job. A scene cannot just advance the plot, it also has to deepen a character relationship or reframe a piece of the mystery or set up a later payoff. The result is a writing structure where almost nothing feels like filler, even in episodes that focus on quieter character work rather than monster attacks. The compression also means individual seasons function as complete dramatic units, which loops back to the Pinkner statement about every season being its own chapter with its own questions and its own answers. Cliffhangers and multi-strand tracking. The show is constructed on cliffhanger endings, and the cliffhangers are positioned with the same care a magician uses to time a reveal. The Season 2 finale ends with the boy in white pushing Tabitha out of the lighthouse window, which is the kind of moment that flips an entire mythology on its head in a single shot. Season 3 closes with Jim's throat being torn open in front of a time-traveling Julie, and Season 4's premiere ends on the Sophia reveal that recontextualizes every interaction that character has had with the rest of the cast since the bus arrived. A critic's shorthand for the lost lineage applies to From in a particularly clean way, because every episode ends with the dramatic equivalent of pointing at something off-screen and shouting, "Look at that," which keeps the next episode pressure constant throughout the season. Within individual episodes, the show juggles parallel storylines by cross-cutting between character groups, and the cross-cutting itself is part of the writing discipline. Season 2, Episode 2, runs 4 storylines at once, tracking Boyd and Martin in the chained chamber, Jim trapped under the collapsed house, Victor and Tabitha pushing through the woods, and Donna corralling the bus passengers inside the diner. Each thread carries its own tension, and the cuts between them are timed so that one storyline's cliffhanger lands right before another storyline's emotional beat. That kind of weaving requires writers' room coordination at a level that most shows cannot sustain across an entire season, and From has been pulling it off consistently since the pilot. Season 1 is survival horror. Each season of From operates in a different genre register, and recognizing the shifts is one of the keys to understanding why the show feels different from year to year, while still carrying a consistent identity. Season 1 lives in the survival horror mode, which means the storytelling priorities are establishing the rules of the world and putting the audience inside the nightly terror that the residents experience. The talismans repel the creatures only inside enclosed spaces, and only if the doors and windows stay shut, and that single rule generates almost all of the first season's most effective scares. The creatures themselves come at you smiling, which is the inversion of every standard horror movie threat where the monster is supposed to look monstrous. Season 1 builds the world brick by brick, and by the finale, the audience knows the rules well enough that the writers can start to bend them. The pacing of Season 1 prioritizes immediate threat over deep mythology, which is the correct choice for a debut season because the audience needs to be hooked emotionally before they will invest in long-term answers. The creators front-load the urgency, then begin to plant the larger questions in the background. The radio in the cellar of Tabitha and Jim's house starts whispering toward the end of the season. The bottle tree begins appearing in the periphery of shots, and Father Khatri's sermons start framing the situation in theological terms. None of these threads pay off in Season 1, which is part of the design, since the contract Griffin keeps mentioning requires the show to plant seeds early and let them grow for years before harvest. Season 2 turns into a mystery procedural. Season 2 shifts the show into mystery procedural mode, which sounds like a strange description for a horror series but accurately captures the change in tone. The town transforms from a survival situation into a puzzle that the characters are actively working to solve. Boyd discovers chained Martin and the music box, Jade chases the symbol that he has started seeing everywhere, and Jim constructs a literal wall of questions inside his garage. The wall of questions deserves special attention because it functions as the show's central writing thesis made physical, with Jim writing "Where are we across the surface?" and insisting there is something they aren't seeing yet, a question they haven't yet asked. That moment is Pinkner's stated rule turned into set dressing, since the show was created so that the characters and the audience are asking the same questions at the same time. The introduction of the bus passengers in the Season 2 premiere serves as a narrative reset, injecting fresh outsiders into the established ecosystem and giving the writers new perspectives through which to re-explain the rules without it feeling like exposition. Donna's diner becomes a holding pen for the newcomers, and the disorientation of the bus passengers mirrors the disorientation the audience felt at the start of Season 1, which lets returning viewers feel slightly ahead of the story for the first time. Investigation drives the second season more than survival does, even though the nightly threat never goes away, and the procedural framework allows the writers to layer mythology onto the foundation that Season 1 built. Season 3 opens up the mythology. Season 3 enters mythology revelation mode, and the shift is so pronounced that some critics described it as the season where From finally shows its hand. The Reincarnation reveal lands inside this stretch of episodes, when the audience learns that Tabitha is Miranda and Jade is Christopher, and that both have been reincarnated repeatedly across the history of the town. The origin of the children gets unpacked, and the man in yellow makes his first physical appearance after spending 2 full seasons as a voice on the radio and a presence in shadows. The critical response was strong, with 100% of 25 critic reviews on Rotten Tomatoes coming back positive for the season, although the pacing drew criticism from a segment of the audience who felt the answers came too slowly or in the wrong order. Many of the same reviewers who criticized the middle of the season praised its final stretch, which lines up with the season's structural design where the biggest reveals get clustered toward the end. The decision to time the major mythology beats inside Season 3 rather than spreading them across all 5 seasons is a deliberate writing choice that connects back to the season as chapter framework. Pinkner credits Lost with teaching him the lesson of pacing answers and having those answers lead to more questions, which he has described as a very purposeful deployment of those answers. The Season 3 reveals do not close the central mystery, instead, they reframe it. Learning that Tabitha is Miranda raises new questions about the cycle of reincarnation, about who is causing it, and about what the children at the heart of the town actually represent. Each answer purchases a new question, and that economy is what keeps the show moving forward without ever feeling like it has emptied its tank. Season 4 becomes psychological warfare. Season 4 enters psychological warfare mode through the Sophia infiltration storyline, which represents a structural pivot the show had been building toward for years. The man in yellow walks among the town residents in disguise, and the audience knows the truth before most of the characters do, which inverts the standard from pattern where the audience and the residents discover things together. That inversion changes the experience of watching the show, since every conversation Sophia has with another character now carries a layer of dramatic irony that did not exist in earlier seasons. Jim's death detonates the season's emotional core, and the town begins attacking itself from within, rather than being attacked from outside. The threat moves inward, and the writing follows it. Critical responses to the fourth season framed the slower pace as a deliberate retreat to fundamentals, with Tom's Guide observing that the season takes a step back from its escalating mysteries, and Collider's April 2026 review noting that the season may decelerate, but it is how, from ensures longevity. The Collider review went on to say that the show is still moving toward a seemingly definitive goal, which is a vote of confidence in the roadmap the creators have been describing in interviews since the beginning. Griffin's pacing philosophy explicitly accepts polarization, since he has said the answers will sometimes come too quickly for some people and too slowly for others. He has invoked Pinkner's mother as an example, telling the story of how she would go to the end of the book first and read the last page, which he uses to argue that the journey is the reward rather than the destination. Characters voice the audience's questions. The dialogue craft of From begins with one foundational rule that Pinkner has stated more than once, which is that the characters ask the questions the audience would ask. That single rule guides almost every conversation in the show, and it solves one of the oldest problems in mystery-driven television. Most shows in this genre face a constant tension between needing to advance the plot and needing to acknowledge what the audience is thinking, and From resolves the tension by having its characters voice the audience's curiosity in real time. When Boyd finds something strange, he asks about it. When Tabitha sees something impossible, she questions it. When Jim builds his wall of questions, he is doing in fiction what every viewer is doing on the couch. Jim's wall is the cleanest example of the technique. He writes the questions on the wall in dry erase marker, and the questions are the same ones the audience has been asking since the pilot. Where are we? What are the creatures? Why can nobody leave? What does the lighthouse mean? What is the bottle tree? Why do the children need to be saved? The wall functions as a narrative pressure valve, releasing the audience's frustration by acknowledging it explicitly and giving the show a physical object that can be returned to whenever a new piece of information lands. The technique is borrowed in part from Lost and Fringe, where Pinkner refined his approach to mystery-driven storytelling, and it works because it never lets the audience feel ignored. Avoiding exposition dumps. The show favors discovery in real time rather than explanation after the fact, and the Sophia reveal in Season 4 is the strongest recent example of the principle in action. Julia Doyle, who plays Sophia and therefore the man in yellow in disguise, noted that the reveal worked precisely because it is not explained with exposition. The show instead chooses to show the events unfold and allows the viewers to figure out what is going on from the actions of the characters, which lets the audience experience the same disorientation the residents will eventually feel when they realize what has been walking among them. The discipline required to pull this off is enormous, since the temptation to over-explain in a mystery show is constant, and Griffin's writer's room has been resistant to that temptation in a way that most genre television cannot match. The result is dialogue that feels lived in rather than functional. Conversations happen because the characters need to talk to each other, not because the audience needs to be told something. When information does get conveyed, it gets conveyed in the natural rhythm of relationships under pressure, which means even the heaviest exposition scenes carry emotional weight. The writers earn the right to deliver answers by making the characters work for them, which gives every reveal a foundation that pure plot mechanics could never provide. The monsters use warmth as a weapon. The dialogue craft for the creatures themselves operates on a principle that flips standard horror conventions inside out. Before talismans entered the world of the show, the creatures shrieked and howled, which is what most genre audiences expect from monsters at the door. After talismans began to be used, they started to whisper, and the whisper turned out to be more terrifying than the scream ever was. The creatures possess uncanny personal knowledge about the residents, frequently playing mind games and taunting them with the unsettling personal information they somehow have at their disposal. Names, memories, intimate fears, all of it gets weaponized through a calm voice on the other side of the door. The showcase example arrives in Season 1, Episode 7, titled All Good Things, where the creature taking the form of Jasmine lures Kevin by playing on shared loneliness before mauling him. That same creature tells Trudy they all know their names, which is a single line of dialogue that reframes every previous monster scene the audience has watched up to that point. Season 3, Episode 4 delivers another version of the technique, when a creature disguised as a nurse delivers the cheery taunt, "You can't save them all, Boyd," after which the creatures deliberately spare Randall as a psychological message rather than a kill. The calm, warm register is the precise inverse of a horror growl, and the contrast between the soothing delivery and the violent intent generates dread in a way that conventional monster sounds cannot replicate. The technique works on viewers the same way it works on the residents, since the human brain reads warmth as safety, and having safety perverted into threat triggers a deeper unease than any jump scare. Cryptic guides speak with precision. The boy in white and the man in yellow function as opposing guides within the mythology of the show, and both characters speak in riddles that the audience cannot fully parse on first viewing. What separates their dialogue from generic mysterious figure speech is that the riddles are precise rather than vague. The boy in white's guidance to Tabitha at the lighthouse is the single line, "It's the only way," which carries enormous weight because it gets delivered immediately before he pushes her out of the window. The same character tells Victor in Season 3, Episode 9, that he thinks they need to learn for themselves, because it's the only way they'll understand. The repetition of the phrase across multiple scenes turns it into a thematic anchor, and the precision of the wording lets the audience track the boy in white's stance across the seasons. The man in yellow's signature is the cost motif, which he introduces in the Season 3 finale when he tells Jim that this didn't have to happen, and that knowledge comes with a cost, and that he did try to warn him. The same scene includes the reveal that the man in yellow was the Season 1 radio voice, when he tells Jim that his wife shouldn't have dug that hole. That single connection retroactively reframes every radio scene from the first season of the show, since the audience now knows who was speaking and why. As Sophia in Season 4, he delivers the line, "This is when they tear themselves apart," which describes the season's central action with chilling economy. The boy in white and the man in yellow speak in different registers, one gentle and one predatory, but both speak with a precision that rewards close attention from the audience. Father Khatri's sermons carry the thesis. Father Khatri's sermons function as direct thesis statements for the show's underlying philosophy, and the writers use his voice to articulate ideas that the genre framework cannot deliver through action alone. His Season 1 Book 74 sermon is the clearest example when he tells the congregation that chaos and faith form the duality of human existence, and that the residents are faced with a chaos they cannot even begin to understand. He goes on to say that within their faith, they understand the chaos is the meaning, before closing the sermon on Proverbs 3-5. The structure of the sermon mirrors the structure of the show itself, since both ask the audience to sit with uncertainty rather than demanding resolution. Sean Majumder, who plays Khatri, confirmed the writing intent in an interview by saying that the sermon sets up so many of the questions the show asks viewers to ask themselves. Khatri's monologues operate at two levels at once, working as pastoral address inside the fiction and as authorial statement outside of it. The Book 74 sermon plays over his realization that Sarah is a vessel for the entity speaking to her, which means the spiritual framing and the plot mechanics are happening simultaneously, with the same words doing both jobs. That kind of layered scripting requires a writer's room confident enough to let dialogue carry meaning beyond its literal content, and From has shown that confidence repeatedly across its run. The reveal architecture pays off years later. The reveal architecture of From operates on timescales that most television shows cannot match, with setups planted in early seasons paying off years later in ways that feel earned rather than retrofitted. The bottle tree numbers are the cleanest example, since they have been visible on glass bottles hanging from the tree since Season 1, and they finally get decoded in the Season 3 finale titled Revelations Chapter 2. The numbers turn out to be the 12 musical notes of a lullaby, and Jim supplies the key when he recognizes the 12-note scale, while Jade plays the lullaby on violin to summon the children. The payoff lands more than 2 full seasons after the setup, which means the writers were either planning the reveal from the beginning, or they did an extraordinary job of making it look that way. Griffin and Pinkner have both stated the former is true, and the structural cleanliness of the payoff backs them up. The Reincarnation reveal operates on a similar timescale, with clues planted across 3 seasons in the form of Tabitha's Miranda visions and Jade's symbol obsession. The resolution arrives in the Season 3 finale when both characters learn what they are, and the show repositions every flashback the audience has seen of Miranda and Christopher inside a new mythological frame. The Man in Yellow follows the same long fuse pattern, appearing as the radio voice in Season 1, debuting physically in the Season 3 finale, and walking among the residents as Sophia throughout Season 4. Each appearance recontextualizes the previous ones, and the cumulative effect is that the audience experiences the mythology as something that has always been present rather than something invented along the way. The Christopher correction. The Christopher correction is one of the most ambitious narrative moves the writers have attempted, since it requires the audience to revise their understanding of a character they have been watching across multiple seasons. For 2 full seasons, Christopher reads as a villain through Victor's flashbacks, with his symbol obsession appearing to precede the massacre that left so many children dead in the town. The Season 3 finale and Season 4 reframe the entire backstory, revealing that Christopher and Miranda were reincarnated parents who tried to stop the child sacrifice rather than cause it. The real killers turn out to be the adults who sacrificed their own children for immortality and became the monsters, which is what Fatima articulates in the finale when she says they sacrificed their children because it promised them they would live forever. Season 4, Episode 4, titled Of Myths and Monsters, shifts the threat further onto the Man in Yellow himself, when Victor reveals that he saw the Man in Yellow consume his mother Miranda. Julie storywalks into the massacre during the same season and sees the Man in Yellow eating a victim, which lands as confirmation of what Victor described. The correction reframes the entire mythology around the Man in Yellow as the central antagonist, with the residents who became monsters serving as his historical accomplices rather than autonomous villains. The audience has to revise their reading of every Victor flashback and every Christopher reference, and the writers earn the revision by making the new framing more emotionally resonant than the original one. The pattern of every answer purchasing a new question holds, since learning what the Man in Yellow is only opens a larger question about where he came from and what he ultimately wants. Jack Bender's visual grammar. The visual storytelling of From carries a consistent signature because Jack Bender directs every premiere and a substantial number of additional episodes, which keeps the directorial DNA tight across the run. The town set was built specifically for the series in Beaver Bank, Nova Scotia, which means the production has a permanent physical location with consistent geography that the camera knows intimately. Bender's stated horror sensibility favors the psychological over the visceral, and he has cited The Shining, The Exorcist, and Alien as his favorites in the genre. Each of those films builds dread through restraint rather than spectacle, and the same restraint shows up in his From episodes, where the camera often holds still long enough for the audience to feel the threat building. His signature techniques include the slow creature approach, the door and window point-of-view shots of being watched from outside, and the day-to-night dread transition tied to the talisman rules. He has spoken about integrating music through character, which connects to the broader audio palette built by composer Chris Tilton, with recurring motifs like the music box and the lullaby anchoring the score across seasons. The Victor merry-go-round flashback composes a child among corpses, with young Victor following the boy in white to the merry-go-round outside what is now the Matthews house, the morning after the massacre. The image carries the weight of the entire backstory in a single composition, and Bender's framing turns it into one of the most haunting shots the show has produced. Sound design alternates silence and the Tilton score in ways that let scenes breathe, with the silences often carrying as much weight as the music. Ensemble management at scale. From juggles a large ensemble across 10 episodes by rotating A-plots and B-plots, and by introducing new characters through narrative resets, the most obvious being the bus arrival in the Season 2 premiere. Killing existing characters serves the same function in reverse, clearing space for new dynamics to develop without letting the cast bloat past the point of manageability. The writer's room has been notably good at pairing characters who do not usually interact, with Griffin's team described in one interview as really good about delighting audiences with mix-and-match character pairings. Season 3 alone produced new pairings between Jade and Tabitha, Sarah and Victor, Henry and Victor, and Kenny and Acosta, with each pairing producing a distinct conversational register that the show could not access through more familiar combinations. Each pairing carries its own thematic weight. Kenny and Boyd anchor the mentor-leadership dynamic, with Boyd modeling for Kenny the kind of sheriff the town needs. Jim and Tabitha work through a marriage under impossible strain, with the supernatural threat amplifying every existing fracture in their relationship. Jade and Victor pair a rationalist with a damaged seer, which generates conversations that neither character could have with anyone else in the cast. A Season 4 review noted the cost of operating at this scale, observing that with the cast so large, some supporting characters have started to function as pawns on the board rather than fully developed people. The trade-off is real, since the show cannot give every character the depth the central ensemble receives without expanding well beyond 10 episodes per season, and the writers have chosen breadth over uniform depth. Why the writing structure works. The full picture of how From is built comes into focus when all of these elements get viewed together rather than separately. The genre register shifts season by season, from survival horror to mystery procedural to mythology revelation to psychological warfare, but the underlying writing structure stays constant across the shifts. Cold opens hook the audience before the title card. The Pixies cover signals the show's fatalistic register. 10 episodes per season force discipline on the storytelling. Cliffhangers and cross-cutting keep the momentum constant. And dialogue craft turns the monsters into psychological threats rather than physical ones. Cryptic guides speak with precision. Father Khatri's sermons articulate the underlying philosophy, and the reveal architecture pays off years after the setups land. What makes the architecture distinct from other genre shows of the post-Lost era is the integration of all these elements into a unified system rather than a collection of techniques. The character-first rule shapes every other decision. Since the mystery exists to pressure the characters, the dialogue exists to voice the audience's questions through the characters, the cliffhangers exist to put the characters in impossible positions, and the reveals exist to change how the characters understand themselves and their world. Griffin's contract with the audience holds up because the structure was designed to fulfill it from the beginning, and Pinkner's loss-derived discipline gives the show the writer's room muscle to execute the plan week after week. Bender's directing keeps the visual grammar consistent enough that audiences trust the show even when individual episodes take risks. And the cumulative effect is a series that feels engineered for the long haul rather than improvised week to week. The cost of the method and why it gets paid anyway? The method is not free of cost, and the Season 4 pacing criticism is the clearest evidence that the writing structure asks audiences to be patient in ways that not every viewer will accept. Some viewers will find that answers come too quickly, others will find that answers come too slowly, and Griffin has accepted that polarization as the price of the approach he has chosen. The supporting cast occasionally functions as pawns rather than full characters, which is the price of operating an ensemble at the scale From operates. Critics have noted that some seasons ask more questions than they answer, which is the price of running an economy where every answer purchases a new question. Each of these costs is real, and the writers have made the trade-offs consciously. What the show buys with those trade-offs is the kind of multi-season payoff that almost no other genre series of the past decade has delivered. The bottle tree decoding lands harder because the setup was planted 2 seasons earlier. The Christopher correction lands harder because the audience watched the original misreading for 2 full years. The Man in Yellow's identity lands harder because the audience heard his voice on the radio in the first season without knowing what they were hearing. The writing structure is built to produce exactly those kinds of payoffs, and the fact that the show has delivered them consistently across 4 seasons is the strongest argument that the structure is sound. The 5th season will test whether the architecture can sustain a true landing, and the answer to that test will determine whether From gets remembered as the rare genre series that kept its promises, or as another ambitious attempt that ran out of runway before the final descent. The stakes of the final season. The final season of From carries weight that almost no other genre series of its generation will get to feel, because the show has been built since day one toward a planned ending, and that ending is now within reach. Season 5 begins filming later in 2026 inches Halifax, Nova Scotia, with a 2027 premiere window, and MGM Plus has been clear in its public statements that this is the conclusion the creators were always aiming for. The renewal announcement on the 15th of April, 2026, confirmed that From is the most viewed series in the history of the network, which means the platform has a financial reason to want the landing to stick as badly as the audience does. Michael Wright, the global head of MGM Plus, framed the announcement around emotional commitment rather than business success, saying he had been looking forward to one day bringing From's epic conclusion to the passionate fans the show has built. His promise to that audience was specific, calling the final chapter as unforgettable as the mystery itself. The pressure on Season 5 operates at multiple levels at once. There is the obvious narrative pressure of resolving years of accumulated mysteries inside the tight container of 10 episodes. There is the comparative pressure of being measured against Lost, the most famous example of a mystery-driven series that divided its audience at the finish line. There is the emotional pressure of honoring character arcs the audience has invested 4 years in, several of which now hinge on irreversible losses like Jim's death. Every decision the writer's room makes from this point forward gets weighed against all three pressures simultaneously, and the show has very little margin for missed steps. What the creators have committed to. The creators of From have been remarkably consistent about the fact that 5 seasons was the goal from the beginning, and the consistency itself is part of the contract with the audience that Griffin keeps describing. John Griffin told The Hollywood Reporter in April 2026 that in full transparency, 5 seasons was always the goal, but the team always wanted to let the story tell them when it was time to end. He revealed there was a fair amount of soul-searching about a potential 6th season, but everyone came to the realization that if they made that 6th season, it would be for themselves, because it would be too hard to say goodbye. That admission is unusually candid for a showrunner, since most teams in their position would lean into the possibility of more episodes rather than closing the door on them. Choosing closure over runway is a creative decision that says something about how the writers see the shape of the story they are telling. The joint statement from Griffin, Pinkner, and Bender framed the endgame in a single line of dialogue that doubles as a thesis. Questions will be answered, answers will be questioned, and there will surely be a cascade of tears and terrors in between. That sentence does 2 jobs at once, since it acknowledges the audience's appetite for resolution while warning that resolution will not look like a clean tying of every loose thread. The team has been transparent that the ending will be imperfect by design, with Pinkner telling The Hollywood Reporter there are a lot of inevitabilities coming into Season 5, and the challenge is making sure they tell those stories in the best way they know how. He said there is luck involved, and there are things you end up leaving on the table, and the ending is going to be imperfect, and the team will surely have some regrets about what they missed. Even with that honesty about limitations, his confidence in the emotional landing remained absolute, saying he felt very confident the audience would feel honored and respected by the way the stories end. The narrative debt inventory. Taking stock of what From still owes the audience requires sorting the open threads into tiers, because not every mystery carries the same weight, and not every mystery has to be resolved for the ending to work. At the top of the pile sit the cosmological questions about what the town actually is. Competing frameworks have been circulating among fans since the pilot, including Purgatory, an interdimensional pocket, a parallel version of Camden, Maine, and the cursed afterlife of the Roanoke colony. The Roanoke theory pulls its weight from the fallen tree and crow imagery that opens every new arrival's journey, which echoes the Croatoan carving that the lost colony left behind as its only clue. The Purgatory reading pulls its weight from the church at the center of the town, the talismans deployed like scripture, and the 1950s Americana aesthetic that feels frozen in time. None of these readings has been confirmed by the show, and Season 5 will have to commit to a definitive answer or accept that the ambiguity will define the legacy of the series. The other major cosmological thread is the question of why the town seems to take only people from the United States. Viewers have inferred this from the map in the sheriff's office, which displays thumbtacks marking the origins of residents, and every tack appears to land inside American borders. The show has never made that rule explicit, and the writers have never directly addressed it in interviews, which means the audience observation might either be a meaningful clue planted deliberately or a production limitation read as intentional. Either reading is possible, and the finale will determine which one wins. The Man in Yellow and the Boy in White. The two opposing supernatural guides of the show carry enormous amounts of narrative weight into the final season, and both still have core questions left unanswered. The Man in Yellow has been confirmed as the radio voice that taunted Jim in Season 1, which means his presence has been embedded in the show since the pilot. He walks in daylight, has black eyes and claws, can speak through radios and phones, appears in Miranda's old paintings, and after slashing Jim's throat in the Season 3 finale, he shapeshifted into the teenage girl Sophia by retrieving a buried suitcase. Throughout Season 4, he hides in plain sight as Sophia, reanimating Roger and psychologically poisoning Henry in ways that echo the madness that consumed Boyd's wife Abby. The official Season 4 synopsis centered on the question of who the Man in Yellow is and what he wants, which means the show has explicitly committed to providing those answers before the credits roll. Griffin told The Hollywood Reporter that Season 4 would address why the Man in Yellow chose that specific moment to step forward, and why the memories of Tabitha and Jade were the catalyst for his arrival. The Boy in White presents the inverse problem, because his alignment remains the most contested question among the fan base. He has guided Victor for decades, told Tabitha when and where to be, and pushed her out of the lighthouse with the line, "It's the only way." Working against the benevolent reading is the fact that he led Boyd to free Martin, which unleashed something genuinely evil into the town. A possible new counterpart called the Boy in Blue appeared in the Season 4 trailer, which suggests the binary of good and evil that the audience has been working with may itself need to be revised before the ending lands. The Reincarnation Cycle and the Children. The reincarnation mechanics introduced in the Season 3 finale are now the central engine of the mythology, and Season 5 has to resolve how that engine actually works. Tabitha being Miranda and Jade being Christopher has been confirmed, and both characters carry the guilt and responsibility of failed lives spent trying to save the town's children. Season 4, Episode 5, titled "What a Long Strange Trip It's Been," advanced the lore significantly when Jade learned through a mushroom vision that the Civil War soldier, the man crushed by a boulder, and the man with a blood-filled skull were all his past selves. Each prior version of Jade had been killed by the town's residents themselves rather than the monsters, once the residents realized he was the one the children call for, and that pattern resets the entire cycle. What remains open is the exact mechanism Jade believes will save the children, which Boyd's Season 4 plan tries to operationalize by retrieving and destroying their bones from the tunnels. The Ankui children themselves have been partially explained, with the name itself meaning remember. Confirmed lore tells us they are the sacrificed children of the original residents, who on the stone altar channeled their hope into the roots of the tree and created the symbol that became the bottle tree and the faraway trees. Jade's symbol, the circle with 3 intersecting branch-like lines first seen in Season 1, Episode 3, on a root cellar wall, has now been resolved as the pattern of the tree roots created by the children's hope. How to actually free those children, and what happens to the town once they are freed, are the central plot questions of the entire final season. The objects and the rules still waiting for explanation. The mechanical questions about how the town functions have been piling up for 4 seasons, and several of them remain unanswered in ways that could prove inconvenient if Season 5 has to address all of them. The talismans are the most obvious example. Nobody has explained why these rune-carved stones reliably ward the night creatures, why they do not work on the lake dolls or the reanimated dead, and whether they have a deeper connection to the children's hope that built the symbol on the tree roots. The talismans have always felt suspiciously convenient inside a world where almost nothing is reliable, and the suspicion itself has been building since Boyd first stumbled onto them. The lighthouse and the bottle trees raise similar questions. The lighthouse sits deep in the forest, nowhere near water, reachable only through the bottle tree, and the cave drawings show people arriving by boat. Tabitha woke in a hospital in Camden, Maine, after being pushed from the lighthouse window, which confirmed that the structure functions as an escape route, but the fundamental question of what it is and who controls it remains open. Camden, Maine being Victor and Henry's hometown is not a coincidence, and the Camden lighthouse that exists in the real town has been visually echoed in the show enough times that the connection has to mean something. Season 5 will either tie the geography together or leave it as one of the threads that gets left on the table. The Mabuse or Mabusa label seen on medical equipment is another thread that fans have been pulling on since the reference points to Dr. Mabuse, the hypnotist puppet master of body transference from the 1921 Norbert Jacques novel and the Fritz Lang film adaptations. The connection to the Man in Yellow as a mastermind operating from behind the scenes is fan theory at this point, and not confirmed canon, which means it might or might not get acknowledged at all. Julie's storywalking and the time problem. Julie's storywalking abilities introduce a layer of complexity that the writers will have to manage carefully in the final season. Her power has been confirmed as the ability to step into the past in real time without being able to change outcomes, which she demonstrated in the most brutal possible way when she witnessed Jim's death without being able to prevent it. The Man in Yellow asked her when she came from during one of their encounters, which suggests he understands her ability and can interact with it in ways the other residents cannot. Her power appears to be tied to the structure of time itself, rather than to the reincarnation cycle that defines Jade and Tabitha, which means it might be a separate mechanism rooted in a different cosmology. What Season 5 has to decide is whether Julie's storywalking gives her agency in the resolution of the central mystery, or whether her power exists purely as a window into the show's mythology. One popular fan theory suggests she may have been the one who planted the talismans in the past for Boyd to find, which would close a temporal loop and give her power a function inside the larger plot. Whether the writers commit to that reading or invent a different payoff, her grief over her father has to anchor whatever resolution they reach. Her tragedy is the most personal in the show right now, since she carries both the supernatural weight of being able to revisit her father's death and the human weight of being a teenager who lost him. Fatima, Smiley, and the body horror thread. Fatima's storyline has evolved into one of the most uncomfortable threads on the show, and Season 5 will have to find a resolution that respects the body horror without using her as a plot device. Her pregnancy was confirmed to be a manipulation by the kimono woman, who fed her Elgin's blood, which led to the birth of the sack that became the resurrected Smiley monster. That sequence proved the monsters cannot truly die, which has enormous implications for any attempt to defeat them through conventional means. In Season 4, she retains a psychic link to Smiley, seeing through his eyes and briefly controlling him to save Kenny in Episode 7. After that act of control, she develops black veins and vitals that mean she should not be alive, according to Episode 8. What remains open is how the pregnancy actually happened on a metaphysical level, what the extent of her control over Smiley will become, and what exactly she is transforming into. Her arc has been one of the most painful to watch across all 4 seasons, since her hope for a family with Ellis has been weaponized against her at every turn. An emotionally satisfying ending for Fatima has to address whether her connection to Smiley becomes a tool for defeating the monsters, a tragic ending where she becomes one of them, or something more complicated where her transformation is the price she pays to save the others. Pega Ghafouri's performance has earned the writer's room a payoff that matches the weight she has been carrying, and Season 5 has to deliver it. Boyd's decline and the supporting arcs. Boyd Stevens has been the spine of From since the pilot, and his physical and mental decline across Season 4 sets up the most important character resolution the final season has to land. His hand tremors and auditory hallucinations of the gunshot that killed Abby have been worsening across the season, with Jade noticing the tremors are more prominent now than they were in Season 3. What is causing the decline remains open, It could be the lingering effects of his cave infection, it could be a manifestation of the town's psychological pressure, or it could be something more cosmological tied to his role as the unwilling protector of the residents. Whatever the cause turns out to be, Boyd's body and mind are clearly running out of time, and the show has been setting up a sacrifice that feels increasingly inevitable. Around Boyd sit the other character arcs that have to land, including Father Khatri's spiritual presence as Boyd's ghostly counselor, Sarah's hearing voices again now that Sophia is active, Henry's basement paintings of the town that his late wife Miranda made before either family was trapped, Victor's special status as the longest-tenured resident who survived alone as a child for decades, Randall's role inside the bus, Elgin's reckoning with having been the kimono woman's instrument in Fatima's captivity, Donna's heart after her near-fatal attack in Episode 6 of Season 4, Kenny's growth into leadership, and Ethan's coming of age tied to the Lake of Tears. That is a substantial number of character threads, and not all of them can receive equal weight in 10 episodes. The triage the writer's room performs will define which characters get full resolution and which ones get gestures toward closure. What Season 4 actually closed. Crediting Season 4 with what it accomplished matters before the criticism of the slow pacing piles up. The fourth season advanced and resolved a meaningful set of threads that had been outstanding for years. The man in yellow stepped fully into the light and got unmasked as Sophia, which fundamentally changed the geometry of the show. The unified rule that connects the cicadas and the dolls got confirmed, with the writers establishing that when someone dies in the township, their nightmares manifest as new monsters. Sarah's Season 2 cicada theory got validated when the life-sized lake dolls killed Roger by ripping off his jaw, after a man who feared them drowned and then died inside the town. Jade's past lives and the brutal pattern of residents killing him themselves got confirmed in Episode 5. The secret tunnel door got found, the totem versus creatures rules got established, and Fatima's link to Smiley got weaponized in ways that demonstrated her psychic reach. What Season 4 added to the pile was almost as substantial as what it resolved. Fatima's accelerating transformation, Boyd's worsening decline, the boy in blue as a possible new entity, Henry's manipulation by Sophia, and the larger philosophical question of whether escape is even possible while the dead remain trapped in the town all got introduced or amplified across the 10 episodes. The fourth season did not coast on the mythology that Season 3 had revealed. It built on that foundation while planting new seeds that Season 5 will have to harvest. The 10-episode compression problem. The structural constraint of 10 episodes per season is both a gift and a challenge for the final run. Pinkner has framed the discipline as a feature rather than a limitation since the show's launch, telling reporters that having done Lost and run those storytelling lessons through the filter of Fringe, the team looked at this series so that every season is its own chapter with its own questions and its own answers. He added that limitations force you to make harder choices, which is a writer's room mantra that becomes the operating principle when the order length is fixed. The challenge of fitting a final mythology landing inside 10 hours of television is that not every open thread can receive the time it deserves. Pinkner's realism about the endgame, from his April 2026 Hollywood Reporter interview, was that there are a lot of inevitabilities coming into Season 5, and the challenge is making sure they tell those stories in the best way they know how. He acknowledged there is luck involved, and there are things you end up leaving on the table, and the team will surely have some regrets about what they missed. The honesty matters, since it gives the audience permission to come into Season 5 with realistic expectations, rather than the maximalist demand that every question must be answered. Pinkner's confidence about the emotional landing, even with the structural compromises, anchors the whole strategy. He feels very confident the audience will feel honored and respected by the way the stories end, and the ending is feeling both surprising and inevitable to him. Why Lost Season 6 is the cautionary tale. The conversation about how to end a mystery-driven serial inevitably runs through Lost Season 6, and From has the unusual advantage of being made by people who lived through that ending firsthand. Lost concluded in May 2010 with The End, watched by 13.5 million viewers, with the best-rated final half-hour pulling $15.31 million. ABC charged up to $900,000 for a 30-second commercial slot during the finale, which gives a sense of how big the cultural event was. Bender directed the finale himself, with Lindelof and Hughes writing it, which means the person directing every premiere has been through this exact landing once already. What made Lost Season 6 divisive was not the existence of unanswered questions, but the structural choice of the Flash Sideways. The Flash Sideways consumed roughly half the season's runtime, presenting what appeared to be an alternate timeline where Oceanic 815 never crashed, before the finale revealed it was actually a shared afterlife where the characters reunite before moving on together. Critics across the spectrum landed in different places on whether the choice worked. The Metascore for the end sits at 74 across 31 critic reviews, with individual scores ranging the full gamut from 0 to 100. Chris Karabot at IGN gave it a 10 out of 10, calling it one of the most enthralling, entertaining, and satisfying conclusions he could have hoped for. Max Reed at Gawker called it incredibly dumb. The split has held for over a decade and shows no signs of resolving. The Flash Sideways trap in detail. The specific structural lesson From has to absorb from Lost is that splitting the audience's attention between the main narrative and a parallel structure during the final season is a high-risk move. The Flash Sideways was a bold, creative choice that paid off for some viewers and alienated others, with Rolling Stone observing that much of the final season's screen time was spent in a space that literally never happened. That framing matters because it captures the frustration of viewers who felt the runtime was being spent on the wrong thing. Hughes later admitted in interviews that the team made a mistake showing the plane wreckage footage during the closing credits, since it accidentally fueled the persistent misconception that the castaways had been dead the whole time. The dead the whole time reading is the most famous misunderstanding in modern television, and the fact that it persists even after Lindelof and Hughes have spent years debunking it shows how powerful a poorly received structural choice can be. The island events were real, and the characters died at various times across many years before reuniting in the afterlife. That clarification has been made repeatedly. The Flash Sideways structure invited the confusion by making the alternate timeline feel like a mystery to be solved rather than an emotional epilogue to be experienced. The cautionary lesson for From is that any structural sleight of hand in the final season risks the same kind of misinterpretation, regardless of what the writers actually intend. The cleaner the final season's spine, the lower the risk of the ending being misread by the audience. What Lost left unanswered. The list of Lost mysteries that never got definitive answers is long enough to fuel a separate video on its own, and the list explains why a substantial portion of the audience felt cheated by the end. Walt's powers, the polar bears, the recurring numbers, why Hurley could see ghosts, the outrigger shootout where the survivors took fire from an unknown attacker, Mother's full backstory, the food and supply drops, the rules of who can be harmed by the smoke monster, why pregnant women died on the island, and who built the giant statue, all entered the finale without resolution and exited the same way. Some of these got partial explanations through tie-in materials and DVD extras, but anything that lives outside the show itself does not count as canonical resolution from the audience's perspective. Hughes defended the strategy directly in interviews, saying early on the team arrived at the fact that trying to answer all the unanswered questions was a recipe for disaster, calling that approach didactic and uninteresting and not true to life. Lindelof has been unapologetic about the ambiguity, saying he is fascinated by questions that will never be answered, because that is what life is. Their philosophy aligned, but the audience split on whether the philosophy was a creative position or a cover for unfinished work. That split is the precise risk From has to navigate, since any answer that feels too convenient will be read as a deus ex machina, and any question left open will be read as evidence the writers never had a plan. The lessons Pinkner and Bender brought with them, the most useful framing for understanding how, from plans to avoid Lost's mistakes, is to look at what Pinkner and Bender themselves have said about the comparison. Bender contrasted the two shows' planning directly, saying Lost was like a big old novel where every season is a chapter, but From is worked out and there's a path. He added that he is not so sure with Lost, which is a remarkable admission given his direct involvement in that show's creative decisions. The contrast matters because it tells you that the people who lived inside the Lost writer's room understand exactly where the structural cracks were, and they have specifically architected From to avoid the same fractures. Pinkner's most direct lesson, articulated in a pop culture principle interview, was that pacing answers and having those answers lead to more questions was the core skill he developed at Lost. He spoke about a purposeful deployment of those answers, making sure the answers lead to new questions, and making sure the show is well aware of the questions the audience is asking and acknowledging them. That last clause is the operative one, since the failure mode of Lost was that viewers felt their questions were being ignored or dismissed rather than addressed. From has been deliberately constructed to never let viewers feel ignored, with Jim's wall of questions serving as the literal in-show acknowledgement that the writers know exactly what the audience is thinking. Other mystery box shows that failed worse. The genre graveyard surrounding Lost is full of shows that tried the same model and could not even reach a planned ending, which contextualizes how rare From's opportunity actually is. Westworld got cancelled after Season 4 on a cliffhanger, with its mythology growing convoluted across the run and the central mysteries never receiving resolution. The OA was cancelled by Netflix mid-arc, leaving its metafictional ending permanently incomplete. Heroes peaked in its first season and spent 3 more seasons unable to recover the structural momentum, eventually getting cancelled with most of its long arc mysteries unaddressed. Flash forward, The Event, and V all got cancelled after a single season or two, with their core questions left dangling. Battlestar Galactica reached a planned ending and divided its audience with a finale widely described as a deus ex machina, even though defenders read the spiritual themes as the point all along. What separates from that graveyard is the combination of a committed 5-season plan, a network willing to fund the planned conclusion, and a creative team with direct experience inside the most famous example of how the model can go wrong. Most of those failed predecessors either lost their network support or never had a destination they were confident enough to commit to publicly. From has both, which is the structural reason critics are willing to grant it more patience than they would grant a show without those advantages. The shows that landed emotionally without answering everything. The single most useful comparison set for thinking about how From should end is the collection of genre series that left mysteries unresolved while still landing emotionally with the audience. The Leftovers, run by Lindelof himself in the years after Lost, never promised answers, with Nora and Kevin's finale ambiguous in its central question about whether Nora's story was true, while the emotional arc landed completely. Lindelof drew the line himself in interviews, saying the longer the characters suffer, the more satisfying their grace has to be. That single sentence captures the lesson of his post-Lost career, since The Leftovers won acclaim by inverting the mystery box model and putting character resolution above plot resolution. The Sopranos cut to black in its final scene rather than resolving whether Tony was killed at the diner, and the choice has been debated for nearly 2 decades without consensus. What the show earned through that ambiguity was thematic finality. The cut to black delivered the feeling that Tony's world was always going to end abruptly, regardless of whether the specific moment shown was the end. Twin Peaks gave its viewers very little resolution in the original run, and got even less in the return. And David Lynch received what TV Line called grace from his audience, because the show had always been about mood and meaning rather than answers. Even Lost itself, for its defenders, succeeded on this metric. Matthew Fox has said the people who were frustrated by not getting answers to why there was a polar bear on the island are missing the point a little bit, since the show was always more about character redemption than mythological accounting. The shows that answered everything and still failed. The inverse case is where the warning gets sharpest, since shows that delivered plot resolution while fumbling the emotional landing tend to be remembered worse than shows that left questions open. Game of Thrones is the most famous recent example, where the showrunners reached the destinations they intended for Daenerys and Arya but arrived at those destinations too fast, leaving the character logic feeling unearned. The Night King's death at Arya's hands and Daenerys' heel turn both technically resolved their long-running arcs, but the speed of the execution made the resolutions feel hollow, and the cultural reception has not recovered. Westworld answered the Christina question and resolved several of its core puzzles before its cancellation, but the rushed pacing and the wasted use of characters like Maeve meant the audience left dissatisfied even where answers were provided. Dexter delivered one of the most criticized finales in recent memory, with the title character getting his sister killed and then escaping to live out his days as a lumberjack in the Oregon wilderness. The resolution made plot-level sense, but the emotional logic of where Dexter ended up violated everything the show had built across 8 seasons. How I Met Your Mother undercut 9 years of emotional investment with a time jump twist that revealed the mother was already dead and the framing story was actually about Ted choosing Robin instead. Each of these shows answered the questions they had set up, and each of them lost their audience anyway, because the answers did not match the emotional logic the audience had been building alongside the writers. The Pinkner Thesis on What Endings Need. Pinkner has articulated the cleanest version of his ending philosophy in his April 2026 conversation with The Hollywood Reporter, and the quote functions as the thesis statement for the entire final season. He recounted that a very smart friend of his, very early in his career, told him that TV is about making the audience fall in love with characters and then watching them suffer. He said he thinks she was right. He went on to explain that as much as the audience is watching for the answers to the questions, if a show is only built around that, there is going to be dissatisfaction at the end. Either the answers are too elusive and frustrating for the audience, or they are too obvious. He concluded that, ultimately, these shows succeed or fail largely on making you fall in love with the characters and where their journeys end up. That framing is the precise mirror image of the Lost critique. The shows that get remembered as great endings are the shows that prioritized character above plot at the moment of landing, even when the plot was the engine that drove the audience to the show in the first place. Griffin's philosophy aligns with Pinkner's, since he has said he is not worried about any one particular reveal or answer, and at the end of the day, what he wants to ensure is that you miss these characters once they are gone. He cited 6 Feet Under and Friday Night Lights as his model finales, both of which prioritized character closure over mythology, and both of which are remembered as among the best endings in television history. The strategy is committed, and Season 5 will either execute it cleanly or expose the limits of the approach. What an earned ending looks like for From. The cleanest description of what an earned ending for From looks like is catharsis prioritized over explanation, with enough plot resolution to honor the mystery and enough emotional closure to honor the characters. The creators have effectively pre-committed to this philosophy through their statements, with Pinkner positioning the success criteria around making the audience feel honored and respected, and Griffin positioning it around making the audience miss the characters. Neither of them has positioned success around answering every question, which means they have inoculated themselves against the maximalist reading that any unresolved thread is a failure. What the show needs to deliver inside the 10-episode container is enough mythological resolution to feel respected, enough character resolution to feel earned, and enough thematic finality to feel complete. The boy in white's alignment has to be settled. The man in yellow's origin and motivation have to be addressed. The reincarnation cycle has to either get broken or get explained as something the characters can live inside meaningfully. The children have to be freed, contained, or transformed. The town's fundamental nature has to receive a committed answer, even if that answer leaves room for interpretation. The character arcs of Boyd, Tabitha, Jade, Julie, Fatima, and Victor have to land in ways that feel both surprising and inevitable. That is a substantial list of jobs for 10 episodes, and the writers will not be able to give every job equal weight. The final calculation. The final calculation for From's ending comes down to whether the audience will accept the trade-offs the writers have already announced they will be making. Pinkner has said the ending will be imperfect by design. Griffin has said there are mysteries that will not get the same time as the central ones. The team has said questions will be answered and answers will be questioned. These statements are not hedging language designed to lower expectations, since the team has consistently said the ending will land emotionally for those who care about the characters above all else. The statements are an honest description of the strategy the writer's room has committed to. What that strategy buys is the possibility of a great ending. What it risks is the possibility of being remembered as another mystery box show that ran out of runway. The architecture is in place for the great ending. The 5-season plan was real. The destination has been known since the pilot. The character work has been consistent across 4 seasons. The creators have learned the lessons of Lost firsthand and have specifically engineered from to avoid the structural traps that divided that show's audience. Whether the execution matches the architecture will determine the cultural memory of the show for the next decade. If it lands, From becomes the rare modern genre series that kept its promises. If it falters, the show joins the longer list of ambitious projects that could not stick the landing despite knowing where the landing was supposed to be. The audience will know which list From belongs on by the time the final credits roll in 2027, and the verdict will rest more on how the characters' journeys end than on how many questions get answered along the way. If you want to be there when the final season actually lands and we break down whether the ending sticks, hit subscribe so you don't miss the coverage. The road to 2027 is going to be packed with theories, trailers, and reveals, and you'll want to be along for the ride.